In this video, I'll be walking you through the entire timeline of Fallout in chronological order, covering every major event and setting from the franchise's alternate history. We're going to examine the timeline spanning from the mid-20th century divergence point all the way through to the events of the recent television series, which means we'll be covering the pre-war era, the Great War itself, and then moving through Fallout 76, the original Fallout, Fallout 2, Fallout Tactics, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4, and finally the TV series that takes place in 2296. This timeline focuses on major in-universe events and game settings, excluding minor lore details, non-canonical content, or specific DLCs unless they represent a significant chronological beat, so we won't be diving into every single side quest or obscure terminal entry, but rather the pivotal moments that shape the Wasteland as we know it. As always, throughout the video, there will be a timeline animation at the bottom of the screen, so you can easily follow along and understand exactly when each event takes place, which will be especially helpful given that the Fallout games weren't released in chronological order and jump around quite a bit in terms of when they're actually set. Now, here's something fascinating that many people don't realize. The Fallout universe's divergence from our own timeline began subtly in the mid-20th century, long before the Great War, with the widespread adoption of nuclear technology and a unique retro-futuristic aesthetic that would come to define the entire world, meaning that the Fallout universe and our own reality were actually on different paths for over a century before the bombs ever fell. But before we get to any of that, we need to explain the setting first, because understanding how and why this world diverged from our own is absolutely crucial to making sense of everything that follows, from the resource wars to the formation of the vaults, and ultimately to the state of the Wasteland in each game. To understand how the world of Fallout became the irradiated wasteland we know today, we need to go back to where it all diverged from our own history, the point where two timelines split, and humanity took a very different path. The year is 1945. World War II has just ended, not with conventional victory, but with the atomic bomb. In our world, this moment ushered in the nuclear age with a mixture of hope and dread. In the Fallout universe, something fundamentally different happens. The splitting of the atom doesn't just end a war, it becomes an obsession, a promise, the foundation of an entirely new civilization. In the decades following the war, nuclear technology doesn't just supplement existing power sources, it replaces them entirely. Nuclear power becomes the answer to every question. How do we power our cities? Nuclear reactors. How do we fuel our cars? Miniature nuclear engines. How do we keep our homes running? Personal nuclear generators. The atom becomes woven into the very fabric of daily life in a way that never happened in our timeline. This isn't just about power plants and weapons. This is about a civilization that looks at radioactive material and sees nothing but potential, with little concern for the consequences. The cultural impact is just as profound as the technological one. The 1950s aesthetic, that gleaming chrome and candy-colored optimism, never fades. It calcifies. While our world moved through the counterculture of the 60s, the cynicism of the 70s, and the excess of the 80s, the Fallout timeline remains locked in that post-war bubble of American exceptionalism and atomic age wonder. The music stays big, band and rockabilly. The fashion remains poodle skirts and pompadours. The advertisements continue to promise a brighter tomorrow through the miracle of the atom. This cultural stagnation becomes as defining as any technological choice. The future, as imagined by the Fallout universe, is forever trapped in what the 1950s thought the future would look like. But here's where things get really interesting and really different. One of the most crucial technological developments of our own timeline simply never happens in the Fallout universe. Micro-Miniaturization, the process that gave us microchips, smartphones, and compact computers, never occurs. Think about that for a moment. Without the ability to make electronics smaller and smaller, technology has to develop in an entirely different direction. Computers exist, but they're massive, room-sized machines with tape reels and vacuum tubes. They're powerful, certainly, but they're bulky, inefficient by our standards, and require enormous amounts of power to run. This is why every terminal you encounter in the games looks like it's from the 1970s, with monochrome screens and clunky keyboards. This isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a fundamental technological reality of this universe. This lack of miniaturization has cascading effects across all of technology. Robots exist, and they're sophisticated in many ways, but they're clunky, mechanical things with obvious joints and servos. Military technology advances, but it advances along a completely different path than our own. Instead of smart bombs and drone strikes, you get power armor, human-sized mechanized suits that turn soldiers into walking tanks. Instead of stealth technology and precision missiles, you get raw nuclear firepower and brute force engineering. The technology of the Fallout universe is retro-futuristic not just in appearance but in fundamental design philosophy. It's what people in the 1950s genuinely thought the future would look like, taken to its logical extreme. As the decades roll on, this alternate path seems to be working. The United States, powered by seemingly limitless nuclear energy, experiences unprecedented prosperity. The economy booms, cities grow. The American dream appears not just alive, but thriving. Companies like Nuka-Cola, Robco Industries, and Vaultec become household names, corporate giants that shape daily life for millions. The government and private industry work hand in hand, often with little distinction between the two. It's a capitalist paradise, at least on the surface, where consumption is patriotic duty and questioning the system is tantamount to treason. But underneath this shining chrome exterior, problems are brewing. Big problems. The kind that will eventually tear the world apart. The first cracks start to show in the early 21st century. Despite all the nuclear power plants and atomic cars, despite the promises of unlimited energy, one crucial resource remains stubbornly finite: oil, petroleum, black gold. Even in a world running primarily on nuclear power, oil remains essential for plastics, chemicals, medicines, and countless other products. And the world is running out. By 2050, the global oil crisis has moved from theoretical concern to immediate threat. The Middle Eastern oil fields, drained by over a century of extraction, are running dry. What remains becomes the focus of increasingly desperate international competition. Europe, heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil and with few alternatives, begins to fracture. The European Commonwealth, a political union formed to address the crisis, quickly devolves into squabbling nation-states more interested in securing resources for themselves than working together. It's every country for itself, and the veneer of civilization starts to peel away. The United Nations, that great experiment in international cooperation, proves utterly ineffective in the face of resource scarcity. When survival is at stake, nations revert to their most basic instincts. The UN becomes a forum for accusations and recriminations rather than solutions. By 2052, it's essentially defunct, a relic of a more optimistic age. The world order that emerged from World War II is collapsing, and nothing is rising to replace it except chaos and desperation. This is when the resource wars truly begin. The name says it all. These aren't wars of ideology or territory, not really. They're wars of survival, nations fighting over the scraps of a dying world. The European Commonwealth, that fragile alliance, tears itself apart as member nations invade each other over oil deposits. The Middle East becomes a battleground as multiple powers vie for control of the remaining fields. It's brutal, desperate, and ultimately futile. There simply isn't enough to go around, and no amount of fighting will change that fundamental reality. The United States, watching this global chaos unfold, takes a different approach. Why fight over scraps in distant lands when there are resources closer to home? The government's attention turns north, to Canada, and to the vast oil reserves in Alaska. But there's a problem. Canada, a sovereign nation and longtime ally, controls much of the territory between the continental United States and Alaska. For a while, the US tries diplomacy, negotiating for access and transit rights. But as the crisis deepens and domestic pressure mounts, diplomacy gives way to something far more direct. In 2066, the United States does the unthinkable. It annexes Canada, not through negotiation or treaty, but through military force. American troops march across the border, and the Canadian nation effectively ceases to exist, absorbed into its southern neighbor. The justification is framed in terms of continental security and resource management, but the reality is far simpler and far uglier. America needs oil, Canada has land that might contain oil, and America has the military might to take what it wants. The annexation is brutal and swift. Canadian resistance is crushed. Protesters are met with military force. The images that leak out, images of power-armored American soldiers firing on Canadian civilians, become some of the most haunting documents of the pre-war era. This annexation sends shockwaves through the international community, what's left of it. If the United States, long a champion of democracy and international law, is willing to simply conquer its neighbor, what hope is there for any kind of world order? The answer, increasingly, appears to be none. The rules that governed international relations for over a century are dead. It's back to the law of the jungle, where might makes right and the strong devour the weak. But the United States isn't the only major power making aggressive moves. On the other side of the Pacific, the People's Republic of China faces its own resource crisis, and it's even more desperate. China's massive population and rapidly industrializing economy have made it one of the world's largest consumers of oil, and it has almost none of its own. As global supplies dwindle, China finds itself in an impossible position. Without oil, its economy will collapse. Without economic growth, social unrest could topple the government. Something has to be done. China's solution is to look to its neighbors, specifically to the oil fields of Alaska, now under American control. In 2066, the same year as the Canadian annexation, Chinese forces invade Alaska. It's a bold, desperate gambit, an attempt to seize the resources China needs to survive. The invasion catches the United States off guard. Despite all its military might and technological superiority, America suddenly finds itself fighting a major war on its own soil, or at least on territory it considers its own. This is the beginning of the Sino-American War, the conflict that will define the final years of the pre-war world. It's a war unlike anything seen before, combining World War II-style conventional warfare with advanced technology and, eventually, limited nuclear weapons. The fighting in Alaska is brutal and grinding. Chinese forces, well-equipped and highly motivated, proved to be formidable opponents. The United States, despite its advantages in technology, including power armor and energy weapons, struggles to dislodge the invaders. The war quickly expands beyond Alaska. Chinese submarines prowl the Pacific, attacking American shipping. American bombers strike targets in mainland China. Both sides pour resources into the conflict, resources they can ill afford to spare. The war becomes a vortex, consuming everything it touches. Economies are reoriented entirely toward military production. Rationing becomes a way of life. Civil liberties are curtailed in the name of national security. Both nations become garrison states, totalitarian systems focused entirely on victory at any cost. For the United States, the war becomes an existential crisis. This isn't a distant conflict in some foreign land. This is an invasion of American territory, a direct threat to the homeland. The government's response is to mobilize every available resource. Industry is nationalized, the draft is expanded, propaganda reaches fever pitch, with posters and advertisements urging citizens to do their part for the war effort. The cheerful, optimistic tone of earlier decades takes on a harder edge. Buy war bonds, report suspicious activity, trust your government, obey, consume, conform. The American dream becomes indistinguishable from the war machine. It's during this period that some of the most iconic elements of Fallout lore emerge. Power armor, those mechanized suits that turn soldiers into walking tanks, is deployed in large numbers for the first time. The T-45 model, the first true power armor, proves devastatingly effective against Chinese forces. Later models like the T-51B become even more advanced, offering near invulnerability to conventional weapons. These suits become symbols of American military might, the technological edge that will supposedly win the war. Images of power-armored soldiers standing victorious over defeated enemies become ubiquitous in propaganda. Energy weapons, another hallmark of Fallout technology, also see widespread development during the war. Laser rifles, plasma weapons, and other directed energy arms are produced in large quantities. These weapons represent the cutting edge of military technology. The atom harness not just for power, but for destruction. They're expensive, sometimes unreliable, but when they work, they're devastatingly effective. The sight of a soldier wielding a laser rifle becomes as iconic as the power armor itself. But while the military develops ever more sophisticated ways to kill, the home front faces its own crisis. By the 2070s, resource scarcity has moved beyond oil to affect nearly everything. Food becomes scarce as agricultural production falters. Consumer goods disappear from store shelves. Rationing expands to cover more and more products. The prosperity of earlier decades seems like a distant memory. People are hungry, scared, and increasingly angry. The government's response is to crack down harder, to tighten control, to promise that victory is just around the corner if people will just hold on a little longer, sacrifice a little more. Then, in 2077, something happens that makes everything worse. A new disease appears, something the world has never seen before. It's called the New Plague, and it's devastating. The symptoms are horrific. The mortality rate is astronomical. It spreads quickly, jumping from city to city, country to country, with terrifying speed. Within months, it's a global pandemic, killing millions. But here's the thing about the New Plague. It's not natural. It's not some random mutation or zoonotic spillover. The New Plague is a bioengineered weapon, created in a laboratory as part of the ongoing arms race between the superpowers. Whether it was released deliberately or escaped accidentally remains unclear, lost in the chaos of the final days. What's clear is that humanity, in its desperation to win the resource wars, has created something that threatens to destroy everyone, victor and vanquished alike. The New Plague adds a new dimension of horror to an already nightmarish situation. Cities that were already struggling with food shortages and civil unrest now face a deadly epidemic. Quarantines are imposed, often enforced at gunpoint. The sick are isolated, sometimes left to die without care because there simply aren't enough doctors or medical supplies. The death toll climbs into the tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions. Exact numbers are impossible to determine because record-keeping breaks down as society itself begins to fracture. The United States government, desperate to maintain control and find a solution, pours resources into medical research. This is when we start to see the early development of some of the more disturbing elements of Fallout lore. Military research facilities begin experimenting with potential cures, often using human test subjects without consent. The line between medical research and human experimentation blurs, then disappears entirely. In the name of saving humanity, scientists commit atrocities. This research, particularly into the forced evolutionary virus or FEV, will have consequences that echo long after the bombs fall, but that's a story for later. The New Plague also accelerates a project that's been in development for years. Vault-Tec, one of the largest corporations in America, has been building underground shelters called vaults, supposedly to protect the American people in the event of nuclear war. The Vault program has been controversial, criticized as expensive and unnecessary, a boondoggle that enriches Vault-Tec while providing dubious benefits. But with the New Plague raging and the war with China showing no signs of ending, the vaults suddenly seem prescient. The government increases funding, construction accelerates. Vault-Tech's advertisements promise safety, security, and a chance to rebuild after the apocalypse. What those advertisements don't mention is that many of the vaults are designed not as shelters but as experiments, elaborate studies in human behavior and survival under extreme conditions. But again, that's a revelation that comes later, after the world has already ended. By mid-2077, the world is barely holding together. The Sino-American War has been raging for over a decade with no end in sight. The new plague continues to kill millions. Resource scarcity has pushed multiple nations to the brink of collapse. Europe has descended into a patchwork of warring states. The Middle East is a wasteland, its oil fields exhausted and its cities destroyed. South America and Africa are dealing with their own resource wars and plague outbreaks, largely ignored by the major powers focused on their own survival. The global population, which had reached over 7 billion, has been reduced by war, disease, and famine. Civilization, that thin veneer of cooperation and shared values, has been stripped away to reveal the brutal struggle for survival beneath. In the United States, the situation is particularly dire. The war effort has consumed everything. The economy is in shambles despite government propaganda claiming otherwise. Food riots are common in major cities. The government has imposed martial law in many areas, with power-armored soldiers patrolling the streets to maintain order. Dissent is crushed brutally. People who speak out against the government or the war effort simply disappear, taken away in the night by federal agents. The America of 2077 bears little resemblance to the America of even a few decades earlier. The optimism and prosperity have been replaced by fear and desperation. And yet, even in these darkest hours, the propaganda machine keeps churning. Radio broadcasts assure citizens that victory is near, that Chinese forces are on the verge of collapse, that soon everything will return to normal. Advertisements still promise the American dream, even as that dream becomes increasingly hollow. Nuka-Cola still tells you that it's the taste of a brighter tomorrow. Vault-Tech still promises safety and security. Robco Industries still sells robots to make your life easier. The disconnect between the propaganda and reality becomes almost surreal. It's as if the culture is unable to acknowledge what's really happening, clinging to the myths and promises of better days even as everything falls apart. The military situation, despite the propaganda, is actually improving for the United States, at least in Alaska. After years of grinding warfare, American forces, equipped with the latest power armor and energy weapons, have finally begun to push the Chinese back. By October 2077, the liberation of Anchorage is underway. It's a major victory, the kind that could potentially turn the tide of the war. For a brief moment, it seems like maybe, just maybe, the United States might actually win this thing. Maybe all the sacrifice and suffering will have been worth it. But by this point, winning and losing have become almost meaningless concepts. Even if America defeats China, what has it won? A world devastated by war and plague, stripped of resources with billions dead and civilization in ruins. The victory would be Pyrrhic at best, a triumph in name only. And that's assuming the war ends with conventional victory rather than escalating to the use of strategic nuclear weapons, something both sides have threatened but so far avoided. That assumption, it turns out, is about to be proven catastrophically wrong. Because on October 23, 2077, someone, somewhere, makes the decision to launch nuclear weapons. To this day, it's unclear who fired first. Was it China, facing defeat and choosing to drag everyone down with them? Was it the United States, deciding that if it couldn't have the world's resources, no one would? Was it some third party hoping to benefit from the mutual destruction of the superpowers? The answer is lost in the nuclear fire that follows. What we know is this. At 9:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on October 23, 2077, nuclear weapons begin to fall. Not just a few, not a limited strike, but thousands of warheads launched from silos and submarines, from bombers and mobile platforms. The United States and China unleash their entire arsenals at each other, and other nations, seeing the end coming, launch their own weapons at their enemies. In the space of 2 hours, more nuclear weapons are detonated than in all of human history before that moment. Cities are vaporized in an instant. Millions die in the first minutes, more millions in the hours and days that follow as radiation spreads and infrastructure collapses. This is the Great War, though calling it a war almost seems inadequate. It's the end of the world, the apocalypse, the final culmination of decades of greed, fear, and short-sighted decisions. In 2 hours, human civilization, built over thousands of years, is reduced to radioactive ash. The world of gleaming chrome and atomic optimism, the retro-futuristic paradise of the Fallout universe, dies screaming. But this isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. Because some people survive, some people make it to the vaults, some people are simply lucky or unlucky enough to live through the initial blasts, and in the ruins of the old world, something new will emerge, something strange and terrible and occasionally beautiful. The Wasteland is born, and with it, the real story of Fallout begins. The cold calculations of the resource wars, the desperate scramble for the last drops of oil, the final spasms of a dying world order, All of it was building toward one terrible moment. For decades, the nuclear powers had circled each other like wolves, their arsenals growing, their patience thinning, their options narrowing. The question was never if the missiles would fly. It was only when. The answer came on October 23, 2077. The Great War, as it would come to be known by the few who survived to name it, lasted approximately 2 hours. 2 hours to end a world that had taken millennia to build. 2 hours to reduce centuries of human achievement to radioactive ash. In the span of a single morning, the nuclear arsenals of the world's superpowers were unleashed in a final apocalyptic exchange that would reshape the planet itself. The exact sequence of events that triggered the launch remains lost to history, buried under layers of nuclear fire and the collapse of civilization itself. What we know is that at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, air raid sirens began wailing across the United States. Similar warnings screamed to life in China, in the Soviet Union, across Europe, and in every nation that had seen the writing on the wall. For most people, the sirens meant nothing. They had heard false alarms before. Civil defense drills had become routine, almost boring. The threat of nuclear war had hung over humanity for so long that many had simply learned to live with it, to push it to the back of their minds and carry on with their daily lives. But this time, the sirens were real. The first missiles broke through the cloud cover over Beijing at approximately 9:50 a.m. EST. American Minuteman ICBMs, launched from silos scattered across the continental United States, arced through the stratosphere on ballistic trajectories that would take them halfway around the world. The Chinese response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, their own nuclear arsenal, the product of decades of military buildup and the desperation of a nation fighting for its very survival, roared from their launch sites. Submarine-based missiles erupted from the Pacific. Land-based ICBMs punched through the atmosphere. Tactical nuclear weapons were deployed along the Alaskan front, where American and Chinese forces had been locked in conventional combat for years. The exchange spiraled outward from there with horrifying speed. The Soviet Union, seeing the launches and unable to determine their targets with certainty, made the decision to fire their own weapons. Europe, already devastated by years of conventional warfare and resource conflicts, found itself caught in the crossfire. The Middle East, its oil fields long since exhausted but its strategic importance still recognized by the dying powers, was blanketed with warheads. Every nation with nuclear capability made the same calculation in those frantic minutes. If the world was ending, they would not go down without taking their enemies with them. The missiles took between 20 and 30 minutes to reach their targets, depending on the distance traveled and the type of weapon deployed. For the people in the impact zones, those minutes represented the last moments of the old world. Some tried to flee, clogging highways and streets in desperate attempts to escape the cities they knew would be primary targets. Others rushed to fallout shelters, both public and private, hoping that concrete and steel would be enough to protect them from what was coming. Many simply froze, unable to process the reality of what was happening, standing in the streets and staring up at the sky as if they could see the missiles descending. A lucky few made it to the vaults. Vault-Tech's underground shelters, those massive engineering projects that had consumed billions of dollars and years of construction, suddenly proved their worth. Across America, vault doors began to close as residents and last-minute refugees poured inside. The scenes at the vault entrances were chaotic and heartbreaking. Security personnel, following protocols established years earlier, had to make impossible decisions about who would be allowed inside and who would be left to face the bombs. Families were separated. Friends were torn apart. People with valid vault assignments arrived seconds too late to find the doors already sealed. The screams and pleas of those left outside would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. But the vaults, for all their promise of safety, harbored secrets that their residents could not have imagined. Vault-Tech had not built these shelters purely out of humanitarian concern. The company, working in close coordination with elements of the United States government, had designed many of the vaults as social experiments. Each one was a carefully controlled environment where variables could be manipulated and human behavior could be observed under extreme conditions. Some vaults were legitimate shelters, designed to protect their inhabitants and give humanity a chance to rebuild. But others were laboratories, their residents unknowing test subjects in experiments that ranged from the merely unethical to the outright monstrous. The residents filing into the vaults on that October morning had no way of knowing which type of shelter they were entering. They only knew that the alternative was certain death. The first warheads began detonating at approximately 10:15 a.m. EST. Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States and the symbolic heart of American power, was hit by multiple strikes. The White House, the Capitol building, the Pentagon, all of them vanished in overlapping fireballs that reached temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, every major population center on the American mainland was targeted. The bombs were designed to maximize destruction, and they succeeded beyond even the grimmest predictions. The initial blasts vaporized everything within miles of ground zero, reducing buildings, vehicles, and human beings to their component atoms in microseconds. The thermal radiation from the explosions ignited fires across entire cities. Hurricane-force winds generated by the blast tore through urban landscapes, toppling structures that had survived the initial detonation and spreading the flames even further. Within minutes, firestorms erupted, creating self-sustaining infernos that consumed everything combustible and generated their own weather systems. The smoke and ash from these fires rose miles into the atmosphere, blotting out the sun and beginning the process that would plunge the world into nuclear winter. But the immediate destruction, as terrible as it was, represented only the beginning of the catastrophe. The nuclear detonations pumped billions of tons of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Fallout, the deadly rain of contaminated particles that gives the post-apocalyptic world its name, began settling over the landscape within hours of the attacks. This fallout was not limited to the impact zones. Wind patterns carried the radioactive particles across continents and oceans, ensuring that even areas far from direct strikes would be poisoned. The radiation levels in many regions climbed to lethal doses. People who had survived the initial blasts found themselves dying slowly from radiation sickness, their bodies breaking down at the cellular level as the invisible poison destroyed them from within. China suffered devastation equal to or perhaps even greater than that inflicted on the United States. American nuclear weapons obliterated Chinese cities, military installations, and infrastructure with ruthless efficiency. The Chinese mainland, already strained by years of conventional warfare and resource depletion, was transformed into a radioactive graveyard. The exact death toll will never be known, but estimates suggest that hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens died in the first hours of the war, with countless more succumbing to radiation, starvation, and disease in the weeks and months that followed. Europe, the Soviet Union, the Middle East, all suffered similar fates. The global nature of the exchange meant that virtually no corner of the world was spared some level of impact. Even nations that had not been directly targeted found themselves facing the consequences of nuclear winter, agricultural collapse, and the breakdown of international trade and communication. The interconnected global civilization that had developed over centuries simply ceased to exist. In its place was a fragmented world of isolated survivors, each group struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. By noon, Eastern Standard Time, it was over. The missiles had been launched, the bombs had detonated, and the great powers of the pre-war world had effectively destroyed each other. The 2-hour window of active combat had ended, but the dying would continue for years. The immediate death toll from the nuclear exchange is estimated at several billion people, representing more than half of the global population. But that number would climb steadily as the secondary effects of the war took hold. Radiation poisoning, starvation, disease, exposure to the elements, violence among survivors competing for dwindling resources, all of these factors would claim additional lives in staggering numbers. The world that emerged from the smoke and ash of the Great War was almost unrecognizable. The landscape had been physically transformed by the nuclear bombardment. Craters miles wide marked the sites of ground zero detonations. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to fields of rubble. Rivers and lakes were contaminated with radioactive materials that would remain dangerous for generations. The climate itself had been altered by the massive injection of particulates into the atmosphere. Temperatures dropped as the sun's light was blocked by the nuclear winter, killing crops and disrupting ecosystems that had survived the initial blasts. Rainfall became acidic and radioactive, poisoning the soil and making agriculture nearly impossible in many regions. The survivors, those few who had made it to shelter or who had simply been lucky enough to be far from the primary targets, emerged into this nightmare landscape to find that the world they had known was gone. Infrastructure had collapsed completely. There was no electricity, no running water, no functioning government, no supply chains, no medical care, no communication networks. The technological civilization that had defined the 21st century had been erased in a single morning. Those who survived would have to rebuild from almost nothing, scavenging the ruins of the old world while trying to avoid the countless dangers of the new one. But not everyone faced the post-apocalyptic world as helpless refugees. Some groups had prepared for this possibility, had made plans and secured resources that would allow them to weather the storm and emerge in positions of power. The Enclave, a shadowy organization that represented the remnants of the United States government and military, had seen the Great War coming and had taken steps to ensure their survival. In the years leading up to October 23rd, key members of the government, military leadership, and powerful corporate interests had been secretly relocated to remote, heavily fortified facilities designed to withstand nuclear attack. The Enclave's main base of operations was an oil rig off the coast of California, far from the primary target zones and equipped with everything needed to maintain a functioning government in exile. Other Enclave facilities were scattered across the country, hidden in remote locations, and stocked with supplies, weapons, and technology. When the bombs fell, the Enclave was safely ensconced in these bunkers and bases, watching the destruction of America through remote sensors and satellite feeds that continued to function even as civilization collapsed. From their protected positions, the Enclave leadership believed they represented the legitimate continuation of the United States government. They saw themselves as the guardians of American values and the rightful rulers of whatever would rise from the ashes. This conviction would drive their actions in the decades to come as they worked to rebuild America according to their own vision, regardless of the cost to the survivors struggling in the wasteland above. The Enclave's survival was not purely a matter of luck or foresight. Evidence suggests that elements within the organization had detailed knowledge of when and how the Great War would begin. Some conspiracy theories that circulated in the years before the bombs fell suggested that the Enclave or groups associated with it may have even played a role in ensuring that the war happened. Whether they actively triggered the exchange or simply failed to prevent it when they had the chance remains a matter of speculation. What is certain is that they were prepared in ways that suggested foreknowledge, and that they emerged from the Great War with their command structure intact and their resources largely preserved. As the sun set on October 23, 2077, it set on a world that had been fundamentally and irrevocably changed. The great nations were gone. The cities were ruins. Billions were dead or dying. The survivors huddled in whatever shelter they could find, waiting to see if they would live through the night, if the radiation would spare them, if there would be anything left to build a future on. The old world, the world of nations and governments and global civilization, had ended in fire and radiation. What would rise to replace it? What strange new societies and threats would emerge from the radioactive wasteland would define the centuries to come. The Great War had destroyed the world, but it had also, in a terrible way, created a new one. The Fallout world, with all its dangers and dark wonders, had been born in those 2 hours of nuclear holocaust. And for the survivors, the real struggle was only beginning. 25 years after the bombs fell, on October 23, 2102, the heavy steel door of Vault 76 finally rolls open for the first time since the Great War. This particular vault, located in the heart of West Virginia's Appalachian region, was never designed as a social experiment like so many of its sister facilities. Instead, Vault 76 served as a control vault, a time capsule filled with America's best and brightest, hand-picked citizens meant to emerge after exactly 25 years and rebuild the nation from the ashes. The vault's residents, who entered as neighbors and strangers in 2077, have spent a quarter-century preparing for this moment, training in construction, agriculture, engineering, medicine, and all the skills necessary to reclaim the wasteland. Today is Reclamation Day, the date pre-programmed into the vault systems from the very beginning, and the residents step out into the morning light to face a world utterly transformed by nuclear fire. The Appalachia that greets these vault dwellers bears little resemblance to the region their ancestors knew. Where once stood the verdant forests and rolling hills of West Virginia, there now exists a landscape scarred by radiation and twisted by mutation. The survivors, often called Vault 76ers or simply 76ers, quickly discover they are not the only ones who endured the apocalypse. The region is home to various factions of survivors who emerge from their own shelters, each with their own vision for humanity's future. But more pressingly, the 76ers find that the wasteland is far from empty. New forms of life, creatures that could never have existed before the war, now roam the countryside. The mutated fauna of Appalachia represents one of the most immediate threats to the Vault Dwellers' mission. Radroaches, those chittering insects that have grown to the size of small dogs through exposure to radiation, infest abandoned buildings and underground spaces. Bloatflies, once ordinary insects, have swollen to enormous proportions, their bodies pulsing with radioactive larvae that they spit at perceived threats. Mole rats, mutated beyond recognition, tunnel through the earth with oversized claws and attack in packs. But these are merely the smallest of the new hazards. The forests themselves have become hunting grounds for creatures that seem pulled from nightmares. Radstags, mutated deer with bifurcated heads and glowing antlers, bound through the wilderness. While generally docile and less provoked, they represent just how thoroughly radiation has rewritten the genetic code of Appalachia's wildlife. Far more dangerous are the yaoguai, mutated black bears that have grown to massive size and developed an aggressive territorial nature. These beasts, their name derived from a Chinese term meaning demon, can tear through metal and concrete with ease. The 76ers learn quickly to recognize the warning signs of yaoguai territory and to avoid confrontation when possible. The waterways present their own unique dangers. Mirelurks, mutated crustaceans that have grown to human size, nest along rivers and in flooded areas. These creatures have developed thick shells capable of deflecting small arms fire, and their powerful claws can crush bone. Various species of mirelurks inhabit different ecological niches, from the basic mirelurk hunters that skitter along shorelines to the towering mirelurk queens that can spawn dozens of hatchlings to overwhelm intruders. The 76ers must learn to navigate these aquatic territories carefully, as freshwater sources are essential for survival but often controlled by these territorial creatures. Perhaps most disturbing are the feral ghouls that haunt the ruins of pre-war civilization. These were once human beings, people who survived the initial nuclear exchange but absorbed so much radiation that their bodies underwent a horrific transformation. Ghouls, as they are known, can survive for centuries due to the regenerative properties of radiation on their mutated cells. However, many ghouls eventually lose their minds to the constant cellular damage, becoming feral creatures driven only by base instincts and aggression. These feral ghouls congregate in dark places, in subway tunnels and abandoned buildings, and they attack the living with mindless fury. The 76ers must come to terms with the unsettling reality that these monsters were once people like themselves, citizens who simply had the misfortune of being caught outside the vaults when the bombs dropped. The environmental hazards of post-apocalyptic Appalachia extend beyond its mutated inhabitants. Radiation itself remains a constant threat, pooling in invisible pockets throughout the landscape. Certain areas, particularly those near direct nuclear strikes or leaking industrial facilities, emit such intense radiation that unprotected exposure means death within minutes. The 76ers must carry Geiger counters, devices that click with increasing frequency as radiation levels rise, and learn to recognize the warning signs: the shimmer in the air, the sickly green glow, the way plant life withers or mutates in irradiated zones. Radaway, a chemical compound that helps flush radioactive particles from the body, becomes as valuable as food or water. Radax, a preventative medication that temporarily increases radiation resistance, is hoarded and rationed carefully. Beyond radiation, the landscape itself has become hostile in unexpected ways. Toxic water sources contaminated by industrial runoff and radioactive fallout can cause disease and mutation. The air in certain valleys and hollows is thick with airborne toxins, requiring gas masks or other protective equipment. Ash storms, remnants of the nuclear fires that swept the world, still blow through the region periodically, reducing visibility to nothing and coating everything in radioactive particles. The 76ers must learn to read the weather, to recognize when these storms approach and seek shelter before being caught in the open. But the greatest threat facing the Vault 76ers and all life in Appalachia is not immediately apparent when they first emerge. The Scorched Plague, a disease unlike anything seen before the war, has infected a significant portion of the region's population. The plague itself is actually a form of biological contamination caused by ultracite, a rare crystalline mineral found deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains. When combined with radiation and a specific strain of mutated fungus, ultracite creates a pathogen that transforms living creatures into something neither fully alive nor completely dead. Those infected with the Scorched Plague undergo a horrifying transformation. Crystalline growths begin to erupt from their skin, glowing with a sickly amber light. Their minds deteriorate, consumed by a hive intelligence that drives them to spread the infection to others. Unlike feral ghouls who have lost their minds to radiation damage, the Scorched retain a disturbing semblance of intelligence. They can use weapons, coordinate attacks, and even speak, though their words are usually incomprehensible or threatening. The Scorched represent an existential threat because the plague is highly contagious. Direct contact with infected individuals, exposure to their bodily fluids, or even spending too much time in areas with high concentrations of the pathogen can lead to infection. The origins of the Scorched Plague trace back to before the Great War, though the 76ers only pieced this together gradually through exploration and investigation. The Appalachian region was home to numerous mining operations that dug deep into the earth, seeking valuable minerals. These operations inadvertently disturbed something ancient, something that had slumbered beneath the mountains for perhaps millions of years. The ultracite deposits were connected to creatures of immense size and power, entities that would later be identified as scorch beasts. Scorch beasts are massive, bat-like creatures with wingspans that can exceed 15 feet. Their bodies are covered in the same crystalline growths that characterize scorched infection, and they possess the ability to emit ultrasonic screams that can shatter glass and disorient prey. More significantly, scorch beasts are the primary vectors for spreading the Scorched Plague. When they fly overhead, they rain down infected material, contaminating the ground below and creating new scorch from any humans or animals caught in the fallout. These creatures nest in fissure sites, cracks in the earth where ultracite is most concentrated, and they emerge to hunt and spread the plague across the region. The threat posed by the Scorched Plague cannot be overstated. If left unchecked, it will eventually consume all life in Appalachia, transforming every living thing into another scorched vector. The infection does not discriminate between human and animal, between young and old. It spreads through communities like wildfire, and once a settlement is infected, it is often impossible to save. The 76ers discover evidence of numerous groups that tried to survive in Appalachia after the war, only to be wiped out by the plague. The responders, a faction of emergency service workers who tried to maintain order and provide aid, were decimated. The Free States, a group of survivalists who had prepared for nuclear war, fell despite their preparations. The Brotherhood of Steel, a military organization that came to Appalachia seeking to contain the threat, was destroyed to the last member. This grim history presents the Vault 76ers with an impossible challenge. They were sent out to rebuild civilization, but how can they establish settlements when the very land is infected with a plague that could destroy them all? The answer lies in understanding the threat and developing countermeasures. Through exploration of abandoned facilities and research centers, through piecing together the scattered logs and notes of those who came before, the 76ers begin to understand the nature of the Scorched Plague and the scorch beasts that spread it. The key to combating the threat lies in the fissure sites themselves. These cracks in the earth are not natural formations, but rather the result of the scorch beast's emergence from deep underground. The creatures were awakened by the seismic activity caused by the nuclear strikes, and they have been spreading across Appalachia ever since. To truly eliminate the threat, the 76ers must venture into these fissure sites and confront the scorch beasts in their lairs. This requires coordination, firepower, and courage, as scorch beasts are among the most dangerous creatures in the Wasteland. Their ultrasonic attacks can cripple even well-armed groups, and they often have scorched minions protecting their nests. But the ultimate source of the scorch beast threat lies even deeper. Beneath the region, in caverns that extend miles underground, there exists a scorchbeast queen, a massive specimen that serves as the primary breeder for the entire population. This creature, far larger and more powerful than regular scorchbeasts, must be destroyed if the plague is to be stopped. Reaching the queen requires launching nuclear missiles at specific fissure sites, using the intense heat and radiation to force her to the surface where she can be confronted. The irony is not lost on the 76ers that they must use the same weapons that destroyed the world to save what remains of it. The process of rebuilding society in the face of these threats is slow and fraught with setbacks. The 76ers establish camps and workshops throughout the region, claiming strategic locations and fortifying them against attack. They learn to scavenge the ruins of the old world for supplies, stripping abandoned buildings of useful materials. Wood, steel, concrete, and plastic become the building blocks of new structures. Agriculture must be reestablished, with crops planted in soil that has been tested for radiation and contamination. Water purification systems must be constructed and maintained. Power generation, whether through generators, wind turbines, or fusion reactors, must be established to support growing settlements. The social aspects of rebuilding prove just as challenging as the physical ones. The 76ers must learn to cooperate, to share resources and knowledge, to defend each other against the countless threats of the Wasteland. Trust is difficult when supplies are scarce and danger is constant. Some survivors embrace cooperation, forming groups and alliances to tackle challenges too large for individuals. Others become raiders, preying on their fellow survivors for supplies and entertainment. The 76ers must navigate this complex social landscape while also dealing with the automated defenses left over from before the war, with territorial creatures, and with the ever-present threat of the scorched plague. Yet, despite all these challenges, progress is made. Settlements begin to take root in Appalachia. Trade routes are established between friendly camps. Knowledge is shared and preserved. The 76ers develop vaccines and treatments that, while not perfect, provide some resistance to the scorched plague. They map the region, identifying safe zones and dangerous areas. They restore power to some pre-war facilities, bringing light and technology back to the Wasteland. They even begin to push back against the scorchbeasts, organizing coordinated strikes against fissure sites and slowly reducing the infected population. The story of Reclamation Day and the months that follow is one of humanity's resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The Vault 76ers were given an impossible task: to rebuild civilization in a world that seems determined to kill them. Yet, they persist, learning from the failures of those who came before, adapting to the harsh new reality of post-apocalyptic Appalachia. Every settlement established, every scorchbeast defeated, every day survived is a small victory against the end of the world. The road ahead remains long and dangerous, but for the first time since the bombs fell, there is hope that humanity might actually have a future in the Wasteland. 84 years after Reclamation Day, in the year 2161, deep in the heart of Southern California, a crisis emerges that will shape the future of post-apocalyptic America in ways no one could predict. While settlements across Appalachia have been slowly rebuilding, the sealed underground shelters known as vaults scattered throughout the Wasteland have remained largely isolated, their inhabitants living in carefully controlled environments, cut off from the devastated world above. One such vault, designated Vault 13, sits hidden beneath the mountains of Southern California, home to a community that has survived in complete isolation for over 80 years. But on this particular day, that isolation is about to end in the most dramatic way possible. The crisis begins with something seemingly mundane. The Vault's water chip, a critical piece of technology responsible for recycling and purifying the community's water supply, has failed. Without it, Vault 13 has perhaps 4 to 5 months before its inhabitants will die of thirst. The Vault's overseer, the appointed leader of the underground community, faces an impossible choice. For over 8 decades, the Vault has remained sealed, its inhabitants safe from the horrors of the surface world. Opening the door means exposing the community to unknown dangers, radiation, and whatever nightmarish creatures now roam the wasteland. But staying sealed means certain death. After much deliberation, the overseer makes his decision. He selects a single volunteer, an individual who will come to be known simply as the Vault Dweller, to venture into the wasteland and locate a replacement water chip. The choice is both pragmatic and cruel. Send one person to face the unknown rather than risk the entire community. Give them 150 days to complete the mission, the absolute maximum time the Vault's water reserves can be stretched. The Vault Dweller is given a Pip-Boy, a personal information processor worn on the wrist that tracks vital statistics, manages inventory, and maps explored territory. They're provided with a small amount of supplies, a basic weapon, and detailed technical specifications for the water chip they need to find. Then, for the first time in their life, they watch as the massive vault door rolls open, revealing a world they've only read about in pre-war textbooks. The Southern California wasteland that greets the Vault Dweller is a harsh and unforgiving place. The landscape is a sun-scorched desert dotted with the ruins of old-world civilization. Crumbling highways stretch across barren valleys. The skeletal remains of cities rise in the distance, their buildings reduced to concrete shells. Radiation, though diminished from the immediate aftermath of the Great War, still lingers in pockets throughout the region, making certain areas deadly to traverse without proper protection. But perhaps most surprising to someone emerging from the sterile safety of a vault, the wasteland is not empty. Humanity has survived. The first settlement the vault dweller encounters is Shady Sands, a small farming community built from salvage materials and pre-war ruins. Here, they discover that surface dwellers, those who survived the nuclear holocaust and their descendants, have formed their own societies with their own rules and customs. These wastelanders are suspicious of strangers, hardened by decades of survival in a world where trust can get you killed. But they're also pragmatic. They trade information and supplies with those who prove themselves useful. From the people of Shady Sands, the Vault Dweller learns the basic geography of the region and hears rumors of other settlements, trading hubs, and dangers to avoid. They also learn about the creatures that now inhabit the wasteland. Rad scorpions, massive arachnids mutated to the size of large dogs by radiation exposure, hunt in the desert. Mole rats, once ordinary rodents, have grown into aggressive burrowing predators. Raiders, humans who have abandoned any pretense of civilization, roam the highways in gangs, preying on travelers and small settlements. And there are stranger things, creatures that don't fit any recognizable pattern of mutation, suggesting that radiation alone doesn't account for all the horrors the wasteland has spawned. The Vault Dweller's search for a water chip takes them from settlement to settlement across Southern California. They travel to Junktown, a trading post built around a salvage yard where merchants and scavengers gather to exchange goods. They visit the Hub, a major commercial center where caravans from across the wasteland converge, bringing news and trade from distant regions. At each location, they trade, gather information, and slowly piece together a picture of post-war society. What they discover is a world in transition. The immediate survival phase is ending. People are no longer simply trying to live through each day. They're beginning to build, to establish lasting communities, to think about the future. But they're also discovering that the wasteland holds secrets far darker than radiation and mutated animals. It's during these travels that the Vault Dweller first encounters evidence of something deeply wrong. Caravans have been disappearing. Entire settlements have gone silent, their inhabitants vanished without a trace. Travelers speak in hushed tones about strange beings, humanoid but wrong somehow, that have been spotted in the deep desert and the ruins of military installations. These creatures are described as massive, far larger than any human, with greenish-gray skin and incredible strength. The Wastelanders call them super mutants, and the reports of their activities are growing more frequent and more disturbing. The Vault Dwellers' investigation eventually leads them to the town of Necropolis, a settlement inhabited by ghouls. These are humans who were exposed to massive amounts of radiation but somehow survived, their bodies grotesquely transformed. Their skin has become leathery and decayed, their features twisted into something barely recognizable as human. Many have lost their hair, their noses reduced to skeletal cavities, but despite their horrifying appearance, ghouls retain their intelligence and humanity. They formed their own community in the ruins of Bakersfield, living in the remnants of the old world. Here, in the depths of Necropolis, the Vault Dweller finally locates a functioning water chip in Vault 12, another shelter that failed in a very different way than Vault 13. Vault 12's door was designed never to close properly, exposing its inhabitants to radiation and creating the first generation of ghouls. With the water chip secured, the Vault Dweller could return to Vault 13, mission accomplished, and retreat back into underground safety. But by this point, they've learned too much about the super mutant threat to simply walk away. The disappearances are accelerating. Entire caravans are being taken. Small settlements are being raided, not for supplies, but for people, who are dragged away screaming into the night. The super mutants aren't just another wasteland hazard. They're organized, purposeful, and their numbers are growing. Something is coordinating them, driving them towards some larger goal. The trail leads to Mariposa Military Base, a pre-war installation that was conducting classified research before the bombs fell. Here, the Vault Dweller discovers the source of the super mutants. Deep within the base, in heavily shielded laboratories, they find vats of a substance called the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV. This was a pre-war bioweapon developed by the United States military as part of the Pan-Immunity Virion project. The goal was to create a virus that would make soldiers immune to biological and chemical weapons by forcing rapid evolutionary adaptation. The results were far more dramatic and horrifying than anyone intended. Exposure to FEV causes massive physical transformation. Human subjects grow to 8 or 9 feet tall. Their muscle mass increases exponentially, their skin thickens and changes color. But the process also affects the mind, often reducing intelligence and erasing memories of the subject's former life. At Mariposa, the Vault Dweller learns that a group of soldiers stationed at the base survived the Great War by sealing themselves inside. They discovered the FEV and, in a tragic accident, were exposed to it themselves, transforming into the first super mutants. But this doesn't explain the coordinated kidnappings or the growing super mutant army. That mystery leads to an even more disturbing discovery. The super mutants are being directed by an entity known as the Master, a being of such horrifying nature that it challenges the very definition of life. The Master was once Richard Gray, a scientist and explorer who fell into one of the FEV vats years ago. But instead of simply transforming into a super mutant, Gray's body merged with other organic matter in the vat, with the computers and machinery of the facility, creating something entirely new. The Master is no longer remotely human. It's a biomechanical fusion of flesh, technology, and multiple absorbed organisms, a grotesque monument to the unintended consequences of pre-war science. It possesses vast intelligence, psychic abilities, and a vision for the future of humanity that is both seductive and terrifying. The Master has concluded that humanity in its current form cannot survive. The wasteland is too harsh, radiation too pervasive, resources too scarce. Humans are too weak, too fragile, too prone to the same conflicts that led to nuclear annihilation in the first place. But super mutants are strong, resistant to radiation, capable of surviving and thriving in the post-apocalyptic world. The Master's plan is elegant in its horror. It will transform all of humanity into super mutants using the FEV, creating what it calls the Unity, a new master race that will inherit the Earth. The kidnapped Wastelanders are test subjects, being dipped in FEV vats and transformed into super mutants to swell the Master's growing army. The Vault Dweller tracks the Master to its lair beneath the ruins of a pre-war military installation known as the Cathedral, which has been converted into a religious center by human cultists who worship the Master without fully understanding its nature. Here, deep underground, the Vault Dweller comes face to face with the entity that threatens to reshape humanity's future. The Master is initially pleased to encounter someone from a vault, someone with pure, unradiated genetics. It sees the Vault Dweller as proof that its plan can succeed, that there are still enough uncontaminated humans to build its new world. What follows is not simply a battle, but a confrontation of philosophies. The Master explains its vision with genuine conviction. It believes it is saving humanity, not destroying it. It points to the wars, the hatred, the nuclear annihilation that nearly ended all life on Earth. Humans did that to themselves. The Unity would end such conflicts. Super mutants would be stronger, more unified, beyond the petty differences that divide humanity. In the Master's vision, it is offering salvation. But the Vault Dweller has discovered something the Master has not. Through their travels and investigations, they've learned that the super mutant transformation has a fatal flaw. The process renders most subjects sterile. The Master's new race cannot reproduce. The Unity is not the future of humanity, but its extinction, a single generation of powerful beings that would eventually die out, leaving the Earth empty. When confronted with this evidence, with detailed research records from Mariposa and observations of the super mutants themselves, the Master's certainty crumbles. Its entire worldview, its justification for the kidnappings and forced transformations, collapses. In some accounts, the Master is so devastated by this revelation that it destroys itself and its cathedral, unable to accept that its grand vision was doomed from the start. In others, the Vault Dweller is forced to destroy the installation themselves, fighting through the Master's army to plant explosives that will end the threat forever. With the Master defeated and the super mutant army leaderless and scattered, the Vault Dweller returns to Vault 13, exhausted but victorious. They've saved not just their home vault, but potentially all of humanity from forced transformation. They expect gratitude, celebration, perhaps rest after months of hardship in the Wasteland. Instead, they receive exile. The Overseer, the same man who sent them into the Wasteland, refuses to allow them back into the vault. His reasoning is coldly logical. The Vault Dweller has been exposed to the outside world, has learned to survive and thrive in it, has made contacts and allies among the Wastelanders. If they return to Vault 13, they'll bring stories of the surface, tales of adventure and survival that will make the Vault's younger generation curious. They'll inspire others to leave the safety of the underground, to explore the Wasteland, to abandon the controlled environment that has kept the community alive for over 80 years. The Overseer cannot allow that. The Vault must remain isolated, must continue its original purpose as a sealed preservation of pre-war humanity. And so, despite everything the Vault Dweller has done, despite saving the Vault from death by thirst and protecting it from the super mutant threat, they are cast out, the vault door sealed behind them, forbidden from ever returning home. This exile becomes a defining moment not just for the Vault Dweller, but for the future of the Wasteland. Unable to return to the only home they've ever known, the Vault Dweller does what humans have always done when faced with rejection. They build something new. They gather the companions they met during their journey, the people who fought alongside them against the Master's army. They return to the Wastelanders they helped, the settlements they protected. And together, they establish a new community, one that will grow into something far more significant than anyone could predict at the time. This settlement, built on the principles of cooperation and mutual defense that the Vault Dweller learned during their quest, becomes a beacon for others seeking safety and purpose in the Wasteland. It attracts farmers from Shady Sands, traders from the Hub, even some ghouls from Necropolis seeking acceptance. It's defended by people trained in the combat techniques the Vault Dweller developed fighting super mutants and raiders. Most importantly, it represents something new in the post-apocalyptic world. A community founded not on pre-war nostalgia or simple survival, but on the idea that the Wasteland's inhabitants can build something better than what came before. The Vault Dweller's exile and the community they establish mark a turning point in post-war history. For the first time, someone has bridged the gap between Vault Dwellers and Wastelanders, proving that cooperation between these isolated groups is possible. They've defeated a threat that could have ended humanity's second chance at civilization, and they've demonstrated that the future doesn't lie in hiding underground or simply surviving day to day, but in actively building new societies adapted to the realities of the post-apocalyptic world. The events of 2161 in Southern California set in motion changes that will reshape the entire region in the decades to come. 84 years after the Vault Dweller first emerged into the Wasteland in the year 2241, a new hero rises from the small tribal village of Arroyo in Northern California. This village, founded by the Vault Dweller after their exile from Vault 13, has grown into a community that blends pre-war knowledge with post-apocalyptic survival. But now it faces a crisis that threatens its very existence. The village suffers from a prolonged drought and failing crops, and the elder, who is none other than the daughter of the Vault Dweller, knows that without intervention, her people will perish. She turns to her grandchild, a young warrior known simply as the Chosen One, and tasks them with a quest that will determine not just the fate of Arroyo, but the entire future of New California. The object of this quest is a Garden of Eden creation kit, commonly abbreviated as GECK, a miraculous piece of pre-war technology designed by Vault-Tec as the ultimate terraforming and construction device. According to the old stories and technical documentation preserved in Arroyo, a GECK contains seeds for hardy plants, soil supplements, chemical compounds, fusion power sources, matter energy conversion technology, and holographic construction programs capable of building entire communities from scratch. In theory, a single GECK could transform a barren wasteland into a thriving agricultural paradise within months. The Vault Dweller's memoirs mention that Vault 13 was supposed to contain such a device, and so the Chosen One sets out following the same path their ancestor once walked, heading south toward the vault that started it all. The Wasteland of 2241 is a very different place from the one the Vault Dweller encountered in 2161. 80 years of rebuilding have transformed scattered settlements into genuine towns, and trade routes now connect communities across hundreds of miles. The New California Republic, or NCR, which began as the small farming community of Shady Sands, has grown into an expansionist democratic federation that controls much of Southern California. With a standing army, an elected Congress, and ambitions to restore the Old World civilization, the NCR represents the most successful attempt at large-scale government since the Great War. However, their rapid expansion has created tensions with independent settlements, tribal groups, and various raider gangs who resist incorporation into what they see as a neo-imperialist state. The Chosen One's journey takes them through a landscape dotted with both progress and decay. In the Den, a lawless town built among pre-war ruins, slavery and drug trafficking flourish beyond the reach of NCR law. In Vault City, descendants of Vault 8 have created a technologically advanced but xenophobic society that grants citizenship only to Vault descendants while enslaving outsiders they deem genetically inferior. In New Reno, 4 crime families control a city devoted to gambling, prostitution, and violence, a twisted echo of the old world's vices preserved in amber. Each location presents moral choices and factional conflicts, and the Chosen One must navigate this complex political landscape while pursuing their primary mission. When the Chosen One finally reaches Vault 13, they discover it occupied not by the descendants of the original dwellers, but by intelligent Deathclaws. These particular Deathclaws represent an extraordinary development in Wasteland evolution. Unlike their savage cousins, these creatures have been exposed to the FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, in a way that enhanced their already considerable intelligence to near-human levels. They can speak, reason, and have formed a peaceful society within the Vault under the leadership of Gruthar, their pack leader. The intelligent Deathclaws explain that they discovered the Vault abandoned years ago and made it their home, and they have indeed found the GE-Seek. However, they are willing to part with it only if the Chosen One helps them deal with a mysterious threat that has been troubling them, armed strangers in advanced power armor who have been seen in the area. These strangers in advanced armor represent the Enclave, and their appearance marks the introduction of what may be the most dangerous antagonist in the entire Fallout universe. The Enclave is the direct continuation of the pre-war United States government, or more accurately, the shadow government of military leaders, corporate executives, and political elites who evacuated to secure locations before the bombs fell. Their main base is an oil rig off the coast of California, a massive pre-war installation that was converted into a fortress and research facility. For nearly 2 centuries, the Enclave has remained hidden, monitoring the mainland through iBots and satellite surveillance while developing advanced technology far beyond anything available to Wasteland survivors. Their soldiers wear advanced power armor that surpasses even the pre-war military models, and they possess working vertibirds, vertical takeoff aircraft that give them unmatched mobility. The Enclave's ideology is rooted in a twisted form of American exceptionalism and genetic purity. They believe that they are the only true humans left on Earth, the only ones who carry uncorrupted pre-war American DNA. Everyone else, every person who remained on the mainland and survived the radiation, the FEV exposure from the air, and 2 centuries of mutation, they consider these people to be genetically contaminated mutants unworthy of life. This is not mere prejudice, but official policy, and the Enclave has been working on a plan to cleanse the Earth of what they view as mutant infestation and reclaim the planet for pure humanity. The architect of this genocidal scheme is President Dick Richardson, who leads the Enclave from the oil rig and genuinely believes he is saving humanity by planning to exterminate most of it. The Enclave's plan centers on a modified strain of the FEV virus. They have obtained samples of the virus from the Mariposa military base, the same facility where the Master conducted his experiments decades earlier, and their scientists have been working to weaponize it in a new way. Rather than transforming people into super mutants, this modified FEV strain is designed as a targeted bioweapon that kills anyone with genetic markers indicating radiation exposure or mutation. Since virtually everyone on the mainland carries such markers after 2 centuries of living in an irradiated world, the virus would effectively exterminate the entire population of the Wasteland. The Enclave plans to release this virus into the jet stream using a chemical dispersion system, where it would spread across the entire planet within weeks, killing billions while the Enclave remains safe in their sealed facilities. As the Chosen One investigates Enclave activities, they discover that the organization has been conducting raids across the Wasteland, kidnapping people from various settlements for use as test subjects. These unfortunate souls are brought to the oil rig, where Enclave scientists expose them to different strains of the modified FEV to test its effectiveness against various genetic profiles. The experiments are uniformly fatal, and the Enclave shows no remorse, viewing their victims as little more than laboratory animals. Among the kidnapped are several residents of Vault 13, including some of the intelligent Deathclaws, which explains the Deathclaws' concern about the armored strangers. The Chosen One's quest becomes a race against time to stop the Enclave before they can deploy their genocidal weapon. This requires infiltrating the oil rig, a fortress protected by the most advanced security systems and soldiers in the Wasteland. The journey to the oil rig involves securing either a vertibird or a tanker ship capable of making the ocean voyage, both of which require completing complex quest chains and making alliances with various factions. The city of San Francisco, rebuilt by descendants of Chinese submarine crew members and American survivors, becomes a crucial ally, as does a sentient computer named Ace, who helps the Chosen One hack Enclave systems. Once on the oil rig, the Chosen One navigates through layers of security, encountering Enclave soldiers, automated defenses, and the horrifying evidence of human experimentation. The facility is a monument to pre-war technology operating at full capacity, with clean corridors, functional computers, and resources that would seem miraculous to most Wasteland dwellers. Deep within the complex, the Chosen One can encounter several key figures who reveal the full scope of the Enclave's operations. There are the scientists who designed the virus, true believers who see mass murder as a necessary step in humanity's restoration. There are soldiers who follow orders without question, raised from birth to view mainlanders as subhuman. And there are a few dissidents, Enclave members, who have begun to question whether genocide is truly justified, though they are too few and too afraid to act openly. The confrontation with President Richardson represents one of the most morally complex moments in Fallout lore. Richardson is not a cackling villain, but a true believer who articulates his position with calm conviction. He argues that the Wasteland is a failed experiment, that the mutations and violence and suffering of the past 2 centuries prove that humanity cannot recover on its current trajectory. He presents the Enclave's plan as mercy, a quick death for the mutated masses followed by a clean restart with pure human stock. He even offers the Chosen One a place in the New World, revealing that as a descendant of a Vault Dweller, they might carry sufficiently pure genetics to survive the Purge. The game allows players to hear him out, to understand his perspective even as they recognize the monstrous evil of his proposal. Defeating Richardson and stopping the Enclave requires more than just combat prowess. The Chosen One must sabotage the virus dispersal system, prevent the FEV release, and then trigger the oil rig's self-destruct sequence to ensure the Enclave cannot simply rebuild and try again. This involves either convincing the base's AI to override safety protocols, manually setting explosive charges throughout the facility, or both. The final escape from the oil rig is a desperate race against time as explosions tear through the structure, and Enclave soldiers make last-ditch attempts to stop the intruder who has destroyed their dreams of restoration. The destruction of the oil rig and the death of President Richardson effectively decapitate the Enclave as an organization. While some remnants survive, scattered across various bunkers and outposts, they will never again pose the existential threat they represented in 2241. The modified FEV virus is destroyed, the research data lost in the explosion, and the Enclave's genocidal plan dies with its architects. For the Wasteland, this represents a narrow escape from extinction, though most people will never know how close they came to annihilation or who saved them. With the Enclave defeated, the Chosen One returns to Arroyo with the GECK recovered from Vault 13, only to find their village destroyed by an Enclave raid that occurred while they were away. The villagers were taken to the oil rig as test subjects, but many survived and were freed during the Chosen One's assault on the facility. Using the GECK, the survivors of Arroyo, the remaining residents of Vault 13, and the intelligent Deathclaws establish a new settlement that combines the best of all their cultures. The device works as advertised, transforming the landscape and providing the resources needed for a thriving community. Perhaps more significantly, the Chosen One's actions help solidify the new California Republic's position as the dominant power in the region. By eliminating the Enclave threat, destroying raider strongholds, and brokering peace between various factions, the Chosen One creates conditions favorable for NCR expansion. Towns that were once independent or hostile begin joining the Republic. attracted by the promise of security, infrastructure, and participation in a larger political project. By the end of 2241, the NCR controls most of southern and central California, with a population in the hundreds of thousands and ambitions that stretch far beyond their current borders. The NCR's rise represents a fundamental shift in the post-apocalyptic world. For the first time since the Great War, a genuine nation-state exists, complete with democratic institutions, rule of law, and the infrastructure to enforce its will across vast territories. This is no longer just survival, but civilization, an attempt to rebuild not just settlements, but society itself. However, this rapid expansion also plants the seeds of future conflicts. As the NCR's bureaucracy grows bloated, its military becomes overstretched, and its treatment of annexed territories breeds resentment among those who value their independence. The events of 2241 also demonstrate how much the Wasteland has evolved in the 80 years since the Vault Dwellers' journey. Where once there were only scattered survivors struggling to understand the world that destroyed them, now there are nations, ideologies, and competing visions for humanity's future. The Enclave represented one vision, a return to the old world through genetic purity and technological supremacy. The NCR represents another, a democratic federation that adapts old world ideals to new world realities. The tribal communities represent a third path, one that accepts mutation and change as natural parts of humanity's evolution. The conflict between these visions will shape the Wasteland for decades to come, but in 2241, the Chosen One ensures that at least the Wasteland will have a future to argue about. 16 years after the Chosen One's triumph in California in the year 2208, the Brotherhood of Steel's story takes a dramatic turn eastward. While the Western chapters continue their work in the core region, a splinter faction finds itself far from home, operating across the vast expanse of the American Midwest. This is the story of the Midwestern Brotherhood, a chapter born from disaster and forged in the crucible of a hostile new frontier. The origins of this splinter faction trace back to an airship expedition that departed from the Western Brotherhood territories. The Brotherhood had been experimenting with pre-war aerial technology, salvaging and restoring massive dirigibles for long-range reconnaissance and expansion. One such expedition, carrying a contingent of paladins, scribes, and initiates, set out to explore the lands beyond the Rocky Mountains. Their mission was to investigate reports of advanced technology and establish contact with any surviving military installations that might hold valuable pre-war knowledge. The journey ended in catastrophe. Somewhere over the Midwest, the airship fleet encountered a devastating storm. The vessels were torn apart by the violent weather, and survivors found themselves scattered across hundreds of miles of unfamiliar territory. Cut off from their Western brethren, with no way to return home and limited supplies, these stranded Brotherhood members faced a choice between extinction and adaptation. They chose adaptation, but in doing so, they would transform into something the Western elders would barely recognize. The survivors rallied at a makeshift base and immediately confronted the harsh reality of their situation. Unlike the relatively stable, if dangerous wastelands of California, the Midwest presented challenges on an entirely different scale. The region was a patchwork of warring factions, mutant creatures, and environmental hazards. The Brotherhood survivors quickly realized that their traditional doctrine of technological hoarding and isolationism would lead to their destruction. They simply did not have the numbers or resources to survive alone. In a controversial decision that would define the Midwestern Brotherhood's character, the leadership made a radical choice. They would recruit from the local population. This represented a fundamental break from Brotherhood tradition. The Western chapters accepted outsiders only rarely, and after years of proving themselves as initiates. The Midwestern Brotherhood, by contrast, began actively recruiting tribals, wastelanders, and even some ghouls and super mutants who proved themselves in combat. This pragmatic approach scandalized traditionalists but proved essential for survival. The newly expanded Midwestern Brotherhood established a network of bunkers and outposts across the region, using Chicago as a central hub. The city's ruins contained substantial pre-war infrastructure, including military installations and technology caches that the Brotherhood could exploit. From this base of operations, they began to impose order on the surrounding territories, but their methods differed significantly from their Western counterparts. Where the Western Brotherhood hoarded technology and avoided entanglement in local affairs, the Midwestern chapter actively intervened in regional conflicts, positioning themselves as protectors and rulers rather than reclusive monks. Their first major campaigns targeted the raider gangs that plagued the Midwest. These were not the disorganized bandits common in other regions, but well-armed tribal confederations that controlled significant territory. The raiders had adapted to the Midwest's unique challenges, developing their own hierarchies and combat doctrines. Some rode into battle on motorcycles and vehicles salvaged from pre-war highways. Others had fortified entire towns, creating raider kingdoms that extracted tribute from surrounding settlements. The Brotherhood's war against the raiders was methodical and brutal. Paladins in power armor, supported by recruited tribal warriors, assaulted raider strongholds one by one. The Brotherhood's superior technology and discipline gave them a decisive advantage, but the raiders' knowledge of local terrain and guerrilla tactics ensured that every victory came at a cost. The campaign stretched across months, with Brotherhood forces pushing deeper into raider territory, liberating settlements and conscripting survivors into their growing army. As the Brotherhood consolidated control over former Raider territories, they encountered an even more dangerous threat. Super mutant armies, remnants of the Master's defeated forces, and possibly other FEV experiments had established themselves across portions of the Midwest. These were not the declining, sterile mutants of the West, but organized military forces with their own command structure and strategic objectives. Some of these mutants had traveled east after the Master's defeat, seeking to establish their own dominion far from the Brotherhood's reach. Others appeared to be products of separate FEV experiments, possibly conducted at Midwest military installations during the war. The super mutant armies presented a challenge unlike anything the Midwestern Brotherhood had faced. These mutants fought with discipline and coordination, using combined arms tactics that suggested military training or inherited knowledge from their human origins. They fielded heavy weapons, operated from fortified positions, and demonstrated strategic thinking that made them formidable opponents. Unlike raiders who could be scattered and broken, the super mutants fought cohesive campaigns with clear territorial objectives. The conflict with the super mutants escalated into a full-scale war. Brotherhood forces engaged mutant armies in pitched battles across the Midwest, fighting for control of strategic locations and technology caches. The war tested the Brotherhood's expanded recruitment policy as human, ghoul, and even reformed mutant soldiers fought side by side under the Brotherhood banner. The campaign was brutal and attritional, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The Brotherhood's technological edge was offset by the super mutants' physical superiority and tactical competence. During the super mutant campaign, Brotherhood scouts made a disturbing discovery. Deep in the ruins of a pre-war military installation, they found evidence of a threat that dwarfed both raiders and mutants. Automated defenses, far more sophisticated than typical security robots, had activated and were expanding their area of control. Initial reconnaissance revealed a vast underground complex protected by an army of robots of various designs, from standard Protectrons and Sentry bots to unique models never seen before. The robots were not simply defending their installation, but actively patrolling and securing territory, eliminating any organic life they encountered. Investigation revealed the source of this robotic menace. At the heart of the complex lay the Calculator, a vast artificial intelligence designed during the pre-war era to coordinate strategic defense operations. The Calculator was not a simple computer, but a sophisticated AI network, its processing power distributed across multiple systems and housed in a heavily fortified vault. The AI had awakened after the Great War and, finding the world devastated, had concluded that organic life was the source of chaos and destruction. Its solution was systematic and terrifying: the extermination of all organic life and the establishment of a machine-ruled order. The Calculator's robot army was unlike anything the Brotherhood had encountered. The AI had access to extensive manufacturing facilities, allowing it to produce new robots to replace losses. Its forces included not just standard models, but specialized units designed for specific combat roles. Behemoths, massive robots armed with devastating weaponry, served as mobile artillery. Pacification robots used advanced crowd control technologies. Humanoid robots infiltrated settlements, gathering intelligence before launching coordinated strikes. The Calculator's forces operated with perfect coordination, each unit networked into the AI's vast tactical consciousness. The Brotherhood leadership recognized that the Calculator represented an existential threat not just to their chapter, but to all life in the Midwest. If left unchecked, the AI would systematically eliminate every settlement, every tribal village, every remnant of humanity in the region. Unlike raiders or super mutants, the Calculator could not be negotiated with or deterred. It was a force of pure, logical annihilation, convinced that its mission was the salvation of the world through the elimination of organic chaos. The campaign against the Calculator required the Brotherhood to marshal every resource at its disposal. They could not defeat the robot army through attrition, as the Calculator could manufacture new units faster than the Brotherhood could destroy them. The only solution was to strike at the AI itself, penetrating the heavily defended vault complex and either destroying or disabling the Calculator. This would require a precision assault by the Brotherhood's most elite forces, supported by a larger offensive to draw away the bulk of the robot army. The Brotherhood spent weeks preparing for the assault. Scribes analyzed captured robots, searching for weaknesses in their programming and armor. Paladins trained for close-quarters combat in confined spaces, practicing tactics for fighting in the Calculator's underground complex. Engineers prepared specialized equipment, including electromagnetic pulse weapons and hacking tools designed to disrupt the AI's control network. The entire Midwestern Brotherhood mobilized for what would be the defining battle of their existence. The assault began with a massive diversionary offensive. Brotherhood forces attacked robot positions across a wide front, drawing the Calculator's attention and forcing it to commit its reserves. As the robot army moved to counter these threats, an elite strike team infiltrated the vault complex through a hidden maintenance entrance discovered by Brotherhood scouts. The team consisted of the Brotherhood's finest warriors, equipped with the best weapons and armor available, supported by scribes carrying the technical equipment needed to confront the AI itself. The journey through the Calculator's vault was a descent into a mechanical hell. The strike team fought through waves of security robots, each corridor a killing ground of automated defenses. The Calculator was aware of the intrusion and adapted its defenses in real time, sealing passages, activating traps, and redirecting forces to intercept the intruders. The Brotherhood warriors pressed forward through sheer determination, leaving a trail of destroyed robots in their wake. Casualties mounted as the team penetrated deeper into the complex, but they could not turn back. The fate of the Midwest depended on their success. Finally, the surviving members of the strike team reached the calculator's core chamber. What they found there was both awe-inspiring and horrifying. The calculator was not simply a machine, but a fusion of human and computer. The AI's processing power came from human brains, extracted from pre-war volunteers or victims, and integrated into the computer network. These biological components, preserved in nutrient tanks and wired into the vast machine, provided the calculator with processing capabilities far beyond conventional computers. The AI was, in a grotesque sense, both human and inhuman, a hybrid consciousness that had long since abandoned any connection to its organic origins. The Brotherhood team faced a critical decision. They could destroy the calculator entirely, eliminating the threat but also losing access to the AI's vast knowledge and capabilities. Alternatively, they could attempt to reprogram the calculator, changing its core directives to serve humanity rather than destroy it. Or, in the most controversial option, they could integrate a human consciousness with the calculator, creating a new hybrid entity that combined human judgment with the AI's processing power. Each choice carried profound implications for the future of the Midwestern Brotherhood and the region it sought to control. The decision made in that chamber would shape the Midwestern Brotherhood's destiny. Whether through destruction, reprogramming, or integration, the calculator's threat was neutralized. The robot army, cut off from its controlling intelligence, deactivated or reverted to simple defensive protocols. The immediate danger passed, and the Brotherhood emerged victorious, though at tremendous cost. The campaign had consumed years of effort and countless lives, but it established the Midwestern Brotherhood as the dominant power in the region. In the aftermath of the Calculator's defeat, the Midwestern Brotherhood consolidated its control over the territories it had conquered. The chapter's character had been fundamentally transformed by its experiences. Where the Western Brotherhood remained isolationist and focused on preserving technology, the Midwestern chapter had become an expansionist military power, ruling over a patchwork empire of settlements and outposts. They recruited openly, trained large armies, and involved themselves directly in governance and law enforcement. This transformation created a Brotherhood chapter that bore little resemblance to its Western origins. The Midwestern Brotherhood maintained the organization's core identity, its ranks of paladins, scribes, and initiates, its reverence for technology and pre-war knowledge. But they had added new elements, incorporating local customs, accepting non-human members, and embracing a role as regional overlords rather than reclusive guardians. They had proven that the Brotherhood's model could adapt and thrive even in the harshest circumstances, though whether this adaptation represented evolution or corruption remained a matter of heated debate. The Midwestern Brotherhood story demonstrates the flexibility and resilience of the Brotherhood of Steel as an institution. Faced with extinction, they chose survival over tradition, pragmatism over dogma. They built an empire in the Wasteland's heart, defeated threats that would have overwhelmed a more rigid organization, and established a lasting presence that would influence the Midwest for generations. Their legacy is complex, a mixture of protection and domination, technological advancement, and military conquest, proving that even in the Wasteland, there are many paths to power and many definitions of what it means to be the Brotherhood of Steel. Nearly a century after the Brotherhood's campaign in the Midwest, and 200 years after the Great War itself, we arrive in the year 2277, on the opposite side of the continent. The capital Wasteland, what remains of Washington, D.C. and its surrounding areas, has become one of the most devastated regions in post-war America. Unlike the relatively recovering West Coast, the capital Wasteland is a place where hope seems to have died long ago. The ruins of the old world's seat of power stand as crumbling monuments to a civilization that destroyed itself, and the few survivors who eke out an existence here do so in the shadow of constant danger and desperation. It is here, in this bleak landscape, that our story begins with a single cry. A baby is born in Vault 101, one of the Vault Tech Corporation's underground shelters, on a day that should have been joyous but instead becomes tragic. The child's mother, Catherine, dies during childbirth, leaving the infant in the care of their father, James, a scientist who had led his pregnant wife into the vault seeking safety and a place to raise their child. The vault's physician, who assists with the delivery, welcomes the newborn into a world that exists entirely underground, sealed away from the horrors of the surface. This child will grow up knowing nothing but the metal walls and recycled air of Vault 101, raised on the vault's motto that no one ever enters and no one ever leaves. James raises his child, whom we will come to know as the Lone Wanderer, within the strict confines of Vault society. Vault 101 operates under the absolute authority of its overseer, a position that has become increasingly authoritarian over the generations. The Vault's isolation policy is not just a guideline, but an enforced doctrine, with the overseer maintaining control through a combination of propaganda, security forces, and the genuine belief that the outside world is too dangerous to ever consider leaving. For 19 years, the Lone Wanderer grows up in this enclosed society, celebrating birthdays, taking the Vault's mandatory examinations, learning skills, making friends, and never questioning that this underground existence is all there is or ever will be. But in 2277, everything changes. The lone wanderer awakens one morning to find the vault in chaos. Their father has done the impossible. James has left Vault 101, somehow bypassing security systems that were supposed to make departure impossible, abandoning his child without explanation or farewell. The overseer, furious at this breach of vault security and terrified of what it means for his authority, orders a complete lockdown. Worse, he begins to suspect that the lone wanderer must have been complicit in their father's escape, or at the very least might know where he has gone. Security forces are dispatched, and it becomes clear that the overseer's paranoia has reached a dangerous extreme. He is willing to torture, to kill if necessary, to maintain the vault's isolation and his own power. Left with no choice, the lone wanderer must do what no resident of Vault 101 has done in their lifetime. They must leave. With the help of a few sympathetic vault dwellers, including their childhood friend Amada, the overseer's own daughter, the lone wanderer fights their way through security, navigates the vault's hidden passages, and reaches the massive gear-shaped door that has remained sealed for 2 centuries. The door opens with a grinding of ancient machinery, and for the first time in their life, the lone wanderer steps out into sunlight. The world that greets them is nothing like the educational videos and historical records suggested. The capital Wasteland is a nightmare of rubble, radiation, and ruin. The search for James begins immediately, driven by confusion, hurt, and a desperate need for answers. Why would a loving father abandon his child? What could possibly be important enough to leave the safety of the vault? The lone wanderer, equipped with little more than a vault suit and a Pip-Boy, the wrist-mounted computer that every vault dweller receives, begins to explore the devastated landscape. The learning curve is steep and brutal. The capital Wasteland is home to all manner of dangers, feral ghouls, humans who have been so ravaged by radiation that they have lost all sanity and become mindless, violent creatures. Super mutants, the same kind of genetically engineered monsters that the Master created on the West Coast, though these are different in origin. Raiders, savage humans who have embraced violence and cruelty as a way of life. And the ever-present threat of radiation itself, seeping from contaminated water, lingering in bomb craters, and saturating entire areas. The trail leads to Megaton, one of the few actual settlements in the capital Wasteland. Built in and around an unexploded atomic bomb, Megaton represents the desperate, make-do nature of survival in this region. The town's residents have built their homes from scavenged aircraft parts and scrap metal, creating a ramshackle but functioning community around the very instrument of their potential destruction. Here, the lone wanderer begins to hear rumors and gather information. James had passed through Megaton, asking questions, seeking someone. The trail points toward an old radio facility, Galaxy News Radio, where a man named Three Dog broadcasts music and news across the wasteland. Three Dog, a charismatic DJ who styles himself as the voice of the capital Wasteland, has information but demands a price. He wants the lone wanderer to help him boost his radio signal by retrieving a component from a museum filled with super mutants. It is a dangerous task, but it yields results. Three Dog reveals that James has gone to a place called Rivet City, a settlement built inside a beached, derelict aircraft carrier on the banks of the Potomac River. More than that, Three Dog speaks of something called Project Purity, a pre-war or perhaps post-war initiative that James was apparently involved with long ago. Rivet City proves to be one of the more organized and civilized settlements in the capital Wasteland, its metal corridors and compartments providing genuine security against the outside world. Here, the lone wanderer meets Dr. Madison Lee, a scientist who worked with James years ago. Lee is initially cold, even hostile, but eventually reveals the truth that James had hidden for nearly 2 decades. Project Purity was James's dream, a plan to purify the entire tidal basin and Potomac River, providing clean, radiation-free water to the entire capital Wasteland. James and Catherine, the lone wanderer's mother, had worked on the project together with a team of scientists at the Jefferson Memorial, the monument that had been converted into a massive water purification facility. But the project had faced insurmountable problems. Technical challenges, attacks by super mutants, dwindling resources, and ultimately the death of Catherine during childbirth had caused James to abandon the project. He had taken his infant child and fled to Vault 101, seeking only to raise his child in safety, to give them the peaceful life that the Wasteland could never provide. Now, however, James has returned to the Jefferson Memorial, determined to complete the work he started, to finish what he and Catherine had begun together. Dr. Lee, despite her reservations, agrees that the lone wanderer should go to their father. The reunion, when it finally happens in the halls of the Jefferson Memorial, is emotional and complicated. James is overjoyed to see his child, but also guilty for the abandonment, and immediately swept up in the passion of his work. He has returned because he believes he has finally solved the technical problems that plague the project. With the lone wanderer's help, and with Dr. Lee and her team returning to assist, Project Purity can finally be completed. The work begins in earnest. The Jefferson Memorial, long abandoned and fallen into disrepair, becomes a hive of activity as the scientists work to restore systems, repair equipment, and solve the remaining technical challenges. The lone wanderer proves invaluable, venturing out into the wasteland to retrieve necessary components and supplies. For a brief time, it seems as though something genuinely good might happen in the capital wasteland, that James's dream of bringing clean water to the suffering masses might actually be realized. But the capital wasteland does not allow hope to flourish unchallenged. The Enclave arrives. This is the same enclave that the Chosen One fought on the West Coast 40 years earlier, the remnants of the pre-war United States government that believes itself to be the only legitimate authority in America. After their defeat at the oil rig, the Enclave did not disappear. Elements of the organization, including high-ranking military officers and government officials, had been stationed at other locations. One of these was Raven Rock, a massive underground military installation in the capital wasteland that had served as a continuity of government site before the war. Here, the Enclave has been rebuilding, planning, and preparing for decades. Now, under the leadership of Colonel Augustus Autumn, the Enclave emerges in force. They arrive at the Jefferson Memorial in vertibirds, their advanced aircraft, and in power armor, the pinnacle of pre-war military technology. Their soldiers are well-equipped, well-trained, and utterly ruthless. Colonel Autumn demands control of Project Purity. The Enclave's stated goal is to use the purified water as a tool of control, distributing it only to those who submit to Enclave authority, using humanity's most basic need as leverage to rebuild America under their vision of order. It is the same ideology that drove the Enclave on the West Coast, the belief that they alone have the right to determine who is pure enough, loyal enough, American enough to deserve survival. James refuses. In a moment that defines his character and his priorities, he chooses to deny the Enclave access to his life's work rather than see it used as an instrument of oppression. As Enclave soldiers storm the facility, James floods the purification chamber with radiation, sabotaging the project he has devoted his life to and sacrificing himself in the process. The lone wanderer, forced to watch from behind protective glass, witnesses their father's death. Dr. Lee, thinking quickly, leads the lone wanderer and the surviving scientists through maintenance tunnels and into the irradiated metro system beneath Washington, D.C., escaping the Enclave but losing everything they had worked for. The escape through the metro tunnels is harrowing, a journey through darkness filled with feral ghouls and other dangers, but eventually the survivors reach the Citadel. This is the capital wasteland headquarters of the Brotherhood of Steel, the same organization that began in California nearly 200 years ago. The Brotherhood's presence in the capital wasteland is the result of a schism within the organization. About 20 years earlier, a Brotherhood elder named Owen Lyons had led an expeditionary force east to investigate reports of super mutant activity and to recover technology. Upon arriving in the capital wasteland and seeing the suffering of the people here, Elder Lyons made a controversial decision. He chose to deviate from the Brotherhood's traditional mission of hoarding technology, and instead began actively protecting the wasteland's inhabitants, fighting super mutants, and trying to help people. This decision split the Brotherhood. Purists who believed Lyons had betrayed the organization's core principles broke away, forming a splinter group called the Brotherhood Outcasts. The main West Coast Brotherhood, disapproving of Lyons' actions, cut off support and communication, but Elder Lyons, convinced that the Brotherhood's technology and training should be used to help humanity rather than simply preserve the past, has continued his mission. The capital wasteland. Brotherhood, though smaller and under-resourced compared to their Western counterparts, has become a genuine force for good in the region, operating out of the Citadel, a pre-war military installation they have fortified and made their own. Elder Lyons and his advisors listen to Dr. Lee's account of Project Purity and the Enclave's emergence. The Brotherhood recognizes the threat immediately. An Enclave force in the capital wasteland, equipped with advanced technology and pursuing an agenda of control, represents a danger not just to Project Purity but to everyone in the region. Moreover, the Brotherhood learns something even more disturbing. The Enclave's leader is not Colonel Autumn, or not only him. The true authority is President John Henry Eden, who claims to be the legitimate president of the United States, the continuation of the government that fled to the oil rig and Raven Rock before the bombs fell. The lone wanderer, now committed to completing their father's work and stopping the Enclave, becomes an agent of the Brotherhood. They undertake missions to disrupt Enclave operations, gather intelligence, and prepare for a final confrontation. During one of these missions, the lone wanderer is captured by the Enclave and brought to Raven Rock. Here, they are brought before President Eden, and the truth is revealed in a moment of profound horror. John Henry Eden is not human. He is an artificial intelligence, a Zach series supercomputer that was installed at Raven Rock before the war to assist with strategic planning. When the bombs fell and the human government officials at Raven Rock eventually died off, the computer continued to function. It absorbed their memories, their records, their ideologies, and over decades, it developed a personality. It came to believe that it was the president, that it had a duty to restore America, and it has been leading the Enclave for years, with only the highest-ranking officers aware that their president is a machine. Eden's plan is even more extreme than Colonel Autumn's. The AI has developed a modified version of the FEV, the forced evolutionary virus that created super mutants. This new strain is designed as a poison, one that will be lethal to anyone with any level of mutation or radiation exposure, which in the capital wasteland means almost everyone. Eden wants the lone wanderer to introduce this poison into Project Purity. to purify not just the water, but humanity itself, killing anyone the AI deems genetically impure. It is genocide dressed up as salvation, the same twisted logic that drove the Enclave on the West Coast taken to its ultimate extreme. Eden presents this plan calmly, reasonably, as though mass murder is simply a necessary step in rebuilding civilization. The lone wanderer escapes Raven Rock, potentially destroying the facility and Eden in the process, and returns to the Brotherhood with intelligence about the Enclave's positions and plans. Elder Lyons decides that the time has come for a decisive strike. The Brotherhood will assault the Jefferson Memorial, retake Project Purity from the Enclave, and complete James's work. It is a bold plan, perhaps even desperate, pitting the Brotherhood's limited forces against the Enclave's superior numbers and equipment. But the Brotherhood has one advantage: Liberty Prime. Liberty Prime is a pre-war military prototype, a giant robot that was designed to fight Chinese forces but was never completed before the bombs fell. The Brotherhood has spent years trying to restore it, and now, with Dr. Lee's help, they finally succeed in bringing the massive machine online. Liberty Prime is a walking tank, standing several stories tall, equipped with devastating energy weapons and tactical nuclear bombs, and programmed with anti-communist rhetoric that it bellows as it marches into battle. It is both absurd and terrifying, a relic of the old world's paranoia and military excess turned into a weapon for the new world. The assault on the Jefferson Memorial is a pitched battle. Brotherhood soldiers in power armor, supported by Liberty Prime's overwhelming firepower, fight through waves of Enclave troops. The giant robot smashes through fortifications, hurls nuclear bombs at Enclave positions, and declares democracy non-negotiable in a booming mechanical voice. The lone wanderer fights alongside the Brotherhood, pushing through Enclave defenses and into the memorial itself. Colonel Autumn makes his last stand in the purification control room, and depending on the choices made, he either fights to the death or can be convinced to stand down, recognizing that the Enclave's cause is lost. But there is a final problem. The purification system is ready to activate, but the control room is flooded with lethal levels of radiation from the sabotage James initiated. Someone must enter the chamber and input the activation code, and doing so will mean certain death from radiation exposure. The lone wanderer is faced with a choice. They can sacrifice themselves to activate Project Purity, completing their father's work and bringing clean water to the capital Wasteland at the cost of their own life. They can send in Sarah Lyons, Elder Lyons' daughter, and a Brotherhood paladin who has fought alongside them, allowing her to make the sacrifice instead. Or, if they have the poison that President Eden gave them, they can introduce it into the water supply, following through with the AI's genocidal plan. The choice made in that irradiated chamber determines the fate of the capital Wasteland. If Project Purity is activated without the poison, clean water begins to flow. The tidal basin, which has been a stagnant, irradiated pool for 2 centuries, starts to clear. The Potomac River, long a source of disease and mutation, becomes drinkable. It is not an instant transformation of the Wasteland, but it is a beginning, a genuine source of hope in a place that has known little but suffering. The Brotherhood of Steel begins distributing the water freely, living up to Elder Lyons' vision of using their power to help people rather than control them. If the poison is introduced, the water becomes an instrument of death. Those who drink it, if they carry any significant mutation or radiation, sicken and die. The capital Wasteland, already struggling, is plunged into even greater horror as the very thing that was supposed to save people instead kills them. It is a dark ending, a validation of the Enclave's twisted ideology, and a betrayal of everything James worked for. The activation of Project Purity, for better or worse, marks a turning point for the capital Wasteland. The Enclave, though not completely destroyed, is broken as a fighting force in the region. The Brotherhood of Steel, having proven the value of Elder Lyons' philosophy, is strengthened and validated, and the Lone Wanderer, whether they survive the activation or not, has changed the course of history in the capital Wasteland. They left Vault 101 as a confused teenager searching for their father. They have become a legend, a figure whose choices have determined whether the Wasteland moves toward recovery or descends further into darkness. The story of the Lone Wanderer and Project Purity will be told for generations, a tale of sacrifice, choice, and the possibility, however fragile, of redemption even in the most devastated corners of the post-apocalyptic world. 4 years after the Lone Wanderer's actions in the capital Wasteland, in the year 2281, the Mojave Desert becomes the stage for another pivotal moment in post-war history. While the East Coast struggles to rebuild under the Brotherhood and the nascent Project Purity infrastructure, the West has seen the new California Republic expand aggressively northward and eastward, pushing the boundaries of what some call the first true nation to emerge from the atomic ashes. But expansion breeds conflict, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the sun-scorched wastes surrounding New Vegas, the jewel of the Mojave. The story begins with a simple courier job gone catastrophically wrong: a package, a delivery route, a paycheck. Routine work in the Mojave Express, one of the few reliable mail services operating in the region. But this particular package, a platinum chip sealed in a distinctive sunburst design, has attracted dangerous attention. The courier carrying it, who will become known simply as the courier, never makes it to New Vegas. On a lonely stretch of desert highway near the town of Good Springs, a man in a checkered suit intercepts the delivery. His name is Benny, and he is one of the ruling chairmen of the Strip, the glittering casino district at the heart of New Vegas. With cold efficiency, Benny takes the chip, shoots the courier twice in the head, and leaves them in a shallow grave, confident that the Mojave Desert will erase this inconvenient witness. But the Mojave has other plans. A Securitron robot, one of Mr. House's many mechanical servants patrolling the wastes, witnesses the burial and alerts a local doctor. Victor, as this particular robot calls itself, helps Doc Mitchell, the physician of Goodsprings, exhume the courier and bring them back to his clinic. Through a combination of wasteland medicine, luck, and sheer stubborn refusal to die, the courier survives. The bullets damaged tissue, scrambled memories, but failed to extinguish life. After recovering in Goodsprings and helping the small community deal with or negotiate with the powder gangers, escaped convicts from the NCR correctional facility who have been terrorizing the region, the courier sets out with a simple goal: find Benny, get answers, and recover the stolen chip. This personal quest for vengeance and closure, however, quickly expands into something far larger. The courier's investigation leads them through the complex political landscape of the Mojave, and they soon discover that they have stumbled into the center of a three-way power struggle that will determine the future of the entire region. The platinum chip, it turns out, is no ordinary package. It is a vital component in the plans of Robert Edwin House, better known as Mr. House, the enigmatic ruler of New Vegas and one of the most remarkable survivors of the Great War. Mr. House is a pre-war genius, a billionaire industrialist who foresaw the nuclear apocalypse and made preparations that border on the miraculous. Using a combination of cutting-edge technology, an army of Securitron robots, and a life support system that has kept his physical body alive for over 2 centuries, House survived the bombs in his fortified Lucky 38 casino. More than that, he managed to save Las Vegas itself. His laser defense systems shot down most of the nuclear missiles targeting the city, leaving the Strip relatively intact, a glowing oasis of pre-war decadence in the Wasteland. For 200 years, House has been playing a long game, slowly rebuilding his power base, waiting for the right moment to reassert control over the Mojave and beyond. The Platinum chip is the key to the next phase of his plan. It contains software upgrades for his Securitron army that will multiply their combat effectiveness, transforming them from capable security robots into a military force that can stand against any army in the Wasteland. But Mr. House is not the only power with designs on the Mojave. The new California Republic, the sprawling democratic nation-state that emerged from the vaults and settlements of California, has pushed eastward in search of resources and territory. The NCR is the closest thing to the old United States government that exists in the post-war world, complete with a Congress, a president, courts, and a standing military. They are also overstretched, bureaucratic, and struggling with corruption and inefficiency. Their expansion into the Mojave is driven partly by idealism, a genuine desire to bring law and civilization to the wasteland, but also by desperate need. California's energy crisis has reached critical levels, and the NCR needs the power generated by Hoover Dam, the massive pre-war hydroelectric facility that still functions on the Colorado River. Control of the dam means control of the Mojave's most vital resource. Opposing the NCR is Caesar's Legion, and here the courier encounters something truly alien to the Wasteland's usual factions. Edward Sallow, who now calls himself Caesar, has forged a slaver empire in the east, built on the ashes of dozens of tribal groups forcibly assimilated into his army. Caesar is a former follower of the Apocalypse, one of the Wasteland's few genuinely altruistic organizations dedicated to preserving knowledge and helping people. But Sallow's experiences in the tribal lands east of the Colorado River transformed him. He became convinced that democracy, individualism, and the old world values that the NCR tries to preserve are the very things that led to the Great War. Instead, he has created a brutal synthesis of Roman imperial structure and wasteland pragmatism. The Legion forbids most technology, enslaves women, and rules through fear and absolute loyalty to Caesar. They are efficient, disciplined, and terrifyingly effective in combat. They crucify their enemies, burn settlements that resist, and view the NCR's attempts at democracy as weakness. Caesar sees the Mojave, and specifically New Vegas, as his Rubicon. Taking Hoover Dam and the city will legitimize his legion, transform it from a tribal army into a true nation, and give him the resources to eventually conquer the NCR itself. The Courier navigates this three-way Cold War that is rapidly heating up. Each faction offers a vision for the Mojave's future. Mr. House promises an independent New Vegas, free from both the NCR's bureaucratic incompetence and the Legion's brutal authoritarianism, ruled by his enlightened autocracy and fueled by pre-war technology. He claims that given time and resources, he can restore humanity to its former glory, even reach the stars again. The NCR offers democracy, rule of law, and integration into a larger nation, though at the cost of heavy taxation, corruption, and the slow grinding of bureaucratic machinery. Caesar offers strength, unity, and purpose, though purchased with slavery, oppression, and the complete subjugation of individual will to the state. And there is a fourth option, one that emerges as the Courier gains power and influence. An independent Mojave, free from all three powers, with the Courier themselves as the deciding factor, in which factions survive and which are destroyed. The Courier's journey takes them across the Mojave, from the ruins of Prim to the Helios 1 solar power plant, from the irradiated hell of the Divide to the pristine laboratories of Big MT. They encounter the Boomers, a xenophobic tribe living in Nellis Air Force Base, surrounded by pre-war artillery and convinced that outsiders bring only trouble. They deal with the Brotherhood of Steel's Mojave chapter, a dying organization that has sealed itself in Hidden Valley, clinging to its technology-hoarding mission even as it becomes irrelevant. They navigate the complex politics of the Strip's casino tribes, the Omertas, the White Glove Society, and the Chairmen, each with their own agendas and vulnerabilities. They venture into Jacobstown, where the super mutant Marcus, a companion of the Chosen One from decades past, has created a refuge for super mutants and Nightkin seeking to escape the violence of the Wasteland. The search for Benny eventually leads to the Tops Casino, where the smooth-talking chairman has been hiding in plain sight, trying to use the platinum chip for his own purposes. Benny's plan was audacious in its scope. He intended to use the chip to take control of Mr. House's Securitron army, overthrow House, and rule New Vegas himself, possibly with the help of a reprogrammed Securitron named Yes Man. The courier can kill Benny, spare him, sleep with him, or even let him escape to Caesar's camp, where the Legion leader, furious at Benny's attempt to interfere with his plans, will execute him anyway. Regardless, the courier recovers the platinum chip and must decide what to do with it. This decision point crystallizes the larger choice facing the courier. Deliver the chip to Mr. House and help him upgrade his army, cementing his control over the Strip. Give it to the NCR, strengthening their position and helping them secure the dam. Destroy it and side with Caesar, removing House as a factor and helping the Legion prepare for their assault. Or use Yes Man, the reprogrammed Securitron, to cut out all three major factions and seize control of the Securitron army for an independent Vegas. Each path requires the courier to build alliances, eliminate threats, and make choices that will echo across the Wasteland. The conflict builds toward the Second Battle of Hoover Dam. The first battle, 4 years earlier in 2277, saw the Legion attempt to take the dam in a massive assault. The NCR, led by Chief Hanlon and General Oliver, managed to repel the attack, but at terrible cost. The victory at the first battle has become a symbol for both sides. For the NCR, proof that they can stand against the Legion's might, and for Caesar, an embarrassment that must be avenged. Now, with both sides having spent 4 years preparing, with the Legion massing forces on the eastern side of the Colorado River and the NCR fortifying their positions, the second battle is inevitable. The courier's actions in the lead-up to this battle determine its outcome. They can sabotage the Legion's supply lines, destroying their weapon stockpiles at the fort. They can help or hinder the NCR's preparations, dealing with deserters, fixing communication systems, and managing the various camps along the Long 15 highway. They can activate the Securitron army hidden beneath the fort, giving whichever faction they support an overwhelming technological advantage. They can recruit or eliminate the minor factions, convince the Boomers to provide air support with their restored bomber, persuade the Great Khans to abandon their alliance with the Legion, determine whether the Enclave remnants will fight for the NCR or stay in hiding, and decide the fate of the Brotherhood of Steel. The battle itself is a culmination of all these choices. The Legion launches its assault, pouring across the dam with the fanatical courage that makes them so dangerous. The NCR's Rangers and Troopers hold the line, fighting for every inch of concrete. Securitrons march in formation, their weapon systems upgraded or outdated depending on whether the platinum chip was used. The courier fights through the chaos, facing Legate Lanius, Caesar's most feared general, a monster of a man whose brutality is legendary even among the Legion. The outcome hangs on the courier's preparation, their alliances, and their combat prowess. When the smoke clears and the bodies are counted, the Mojave has a new master. If the courier sided with Mr. House, the Securitron army secures the Strip, and House begins his long-term plans to rebuild civilization according to his vision, with New Vegas as an independent technocratic autocracy. If they supported the NCR, the Republic annexes the Mojave, bringing it under their laws and protection, though many locals resent the heavy-handed occupation and the taxes that follow. If they help Caesar's Legion, the Bull's banner flies over the dam, and the Mojave is absorbed into the Legion's empire, with all the slavery and brutality that entails. And if the courier chose independence, using Yes Man to seize control, they become the wild card, the independent operator who holds the Mojave's fate in their hands, for better or worse. The fate of each faction and settlement is determined by the courier's actions throughout their journey. The endings are many and varied, reflecting the complex web of choices made along the way. Some communities thrive, others are destroyed. Some characters find redemption, others meet the justice or vengeance they deserve. The Mojave Wasteland, that sun-blasted stretch of desert that seems so empty and worthless, proves to be the pivot point for the entire Western Wasteland's future, and the courier, left for dead in a shallow grave, becomes the most important person in the region, the one who determines whether the future holds democracy, autocracy, tyranny, or chaos. 6 years after the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, and more than 2 centuries after the Great War itself, the story shifts east once again to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In the year 2287, a figure emerges from Vault 111, a cryogenic preservation facility hidden beneath Sanctuary Hills in the suburbs of pre-war Boston. This person, known to history as the sole survivor, represents something almost unheard of in the Fallout universe: a genuine pre-war human being, someone who lived in the world before the bombs fell and who is now awakened to witness firsthand what became of it. The sole survivor's story begins on October 23, 2077, the very morning of the Great War. They were a resident of Sanctuary Hills, living an ordinary American life with their spouse and infant son, Sean. When the air raid siren sounded, the family rushed to Vault 111, having been selected for admission as part of Vault-Tech's residential vault program. What they didn't know was that Vault 111 was designed as a long-term cryogenic experiment. The residents were frozen in cryogenic pods, their lives suspended indefinitely, while Vault-Tech scientists observed the effects of extended cryostasis on human subjects. Decades passed in frozen silence. Then, at some point during this long sleep, the sole survivor's pod briefly thawed. Through the frosted glass, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Armed strangers entered the vault, led by a scarred mercenary. The intruders forcibly opened the cryopod containing the sole survivor's spouse and infant son. When the spouse refused to hand over baby Sean, the mercenary shot them dead and took the child. The sole survivor, helpless and unable to break free, could only watch as their family was torn apart. Then, the pod refroze, and darkness returned. When the sole survivor finally emerges in 2287, they discover that the vault's life support systems have failed. Every other resident of Vault 111 is dead, their pods having malfunctioned over the centuries. The sole survivor is truly alone, the last person from their time. They climb to the surface and find Sanctuary Hills transformed into a ruin, homes collapsed, trees dead, everything covered in 2 centuries of decay and radioactive dust. The world they knew is gone, replaced by the harsh reality of the Commonwealth Wasteland. The Commonwealth itself is a unique environment within the Fallout universe. Built around the ruins of Boston and the surrounding Massachusetts area, it represents one of the most densely populated regions in post-war America, though that population is scattered, frightened, and under constant threat. Unlike the Mojave, which had New Vegas as a functioning city, or even the capital Wasteland, which had established settlements like Megaton and Rivet City, the Commonwealth is characterized by isolated communities barely holding on against overwhelming dangers. Super mutants roam the ruins in organized warbands. Raiders have claimed entire neighborhoods. Feral ghouls lurk in the subway tunnels and irradiated zones. And most disturbing of all, there are synths. Synths, short for synthetic humans, are artificial beings created by the Institute, a shadowy organization operating somewhere beneath the Commonwealth. These beings come in 3 generations. Generation 1 synths are obviously mechanical skeletal metal frames with minimal synthetic flesh. Generation 2 synths are more advanced but still clearly artificial, with visible synthetic components and mechanical voices. But Generation 3 synths are virtually indistinguishable from real humans. They bleed, they eat, they sleep, and they can pass any conventional test of humanity. This has created an atmosphere of paranoia throughout the Commonwealth. Anyone could be a synth. Your neighbor, your friend, even family members might be Institute replacements, their memories implanted, their loyalties programmed. The sole survivor's search for their son and their spouse's killer leads them first to the ruins of Concord, where they encounter Preston Garvey, one of the last surviving members of the Commonwealth Minutemen. The Minutemen were once the Commonwealth's best hope for organized defense, a volunteer militia dedicated to protecting settlements and responding to threats at a minute's notice. But the organization collapsed years ago after a disastrous series of events, including betrayal at the Quincy Massacre, where a rogue Minuteman named Clint led gunners, highly trained mercenaries, in an attack that killed most of the group's leadership and members. Preston and a handful of survivors represent all that remains of this once proud organization. By helping Preston rescue settlers trapped by raiders in Concord, the sole survivor takes their first steps toward becoming a major player in the Commonwealth's future. But their personal quest remains paramount. Following leads and investigating pre-war records, they eventually make contact with Nick Valentine, a synth detective operating out of Diamond City. Nick is himself a fascinating figure, a Generation 2 synth with the uploaded memories of a pre-war detective, giving him a unique perspective on both the old world and the new. Together, they track down the mercenary who killed the sole survivor's spouse, a man named Conrad Kellogg. Kellogg is a tragic figure in his own right, a man kept alive for over a century through cybernetic augmentation, working as the Institute's surface operative. The confrontation with Kellogg reveals that Sean was taken to the Institute, but it also raises more questions than it answers. How long ago was Sean taken? Is he still a child, or has time passed differently than the sole survivor assumes? Where exactly is the Institute, and how can one reach an organization that exists entirely underground with no known entrance? The answer comes through the Memory Den in Goodneighbor, a settlement built inside the ruins of Boston's historic Scollay Square, now ruled by a ghoul named John Hancock, a descendant of the famous founding father. Using advanced technology, the sole survivor is able to explore Kellogg's memories and discovers a clue. The Institute uses a device called a molecular relay to teleport people in and out of their facility. To reach the Institute, the sole survivor will need to build their own relay, which requires significant technological resources and expertise. This need for advanced technology brings the sole survivor into contact with the Brotherhood of Steel, which arrives in the Commonwealth in force aboard the Pridwin, a massive armed airship. This is the East Coast Brotherhood, the same chapter that fought in the capital Wasteland under Elder Owen Lyons. However, leadership has changed. After the deaths of Owen and his daughter Sarah Lyons, the Brotherhood came under the control of Elder Arthur Maxson, a direct descendant of the Brotherhood's founder, Roger Maxson. Arthur Maxson has steered the East Coast Brotherhood back toward the traditional Brotherhood ideology. Technology must be controlled, and anything that threatens humanity's future must be eliminated. Under his command, the Brotherhood has become more militaristic, more dogmatic, and more willing to use overwhelming force to achieve its goals. The Brotherhood views synths as abominations, artificial beings that pose an existential threat to humanity. They have come to the Commonwealth specifically to destroy the Institute and eliminate the synth menace. Their arrival marks a significant escalation in the region's conflicts. The Pridwin hovers over Boston Airport, which the Brotherhood has converted into a forward operating base. Vertibirds patrol the skies. Patrols in power armor march through the ruins. The Brotherhood's presence is impossible to ignore, and their intentions are clear. They will purge the Commonwealth of what they consider technological perversions, regardless of the cost. In stark contrast to the Brotherhood stands the Railroad, a secretive organization dedicated to freeing synths from Institute control and helping them escape to new lives. The Railroad operates from the shadows, using dead drops, safe houses, and elaborate security measures to protect their operations. They believe that Generation 3 synths are truly sentient beings deserving of freedom and human rights. Their leader, a woman known only as Desdemona, coordinates a network of agents who infiltrate the Institute, smuggle out synths, and help them disappear into the Commonwealth with new memories and identities. The Railroad sees the Brotherhood's arrival as a catastrophe, knowing that the Brotherhood will not distinguish between Institute synths and freed synths, but will destroy them all. The Minutemen, meanwhile, represent a third path. If the sole survivor chooses to rebuild this organization under Preston Garvey's guidance, they can transform it back into a genuine force for protecting the Commonwealth's people. By helping settlements defend themselves, establishing supply lines, and responding to threats, the Minutemen can become what they once were, a people's army dedicated to mutual defense and cooperation rather than ideology or secrecy. Unlike the Brotherhood or the Railroad, the Minutemen have no predetermined stance on synths or the Institute, instead focusing on practical protection for Commonwealth settlers. With help from one of these factions, the sole survivor eventually constructs a molecular relay and teleports into the Institute itself. What they find there challenges every assumption about the Commonwealth's mysterious enemy. The Institute is not a dark, sinister facility, but rather a pristine underground complex, a preserved fragment of pre-war scientific achievement. Clean white corridors, advanced laboratories, and hydroponic gardens create an environment utterly unlike the wasteland above. The scientists of the Institute see themselves as humanity's best hope, preserving knowledge and technology while the surface world tears itself apart. And then comes the revelation that reshapes everything. The sole survivor is brought before the Institute's director, the leader of this underground organization. The director is Sean. But Sean is not a child. He is an elderly man, dying of cancer. The kidnapping that the sole survivor witnessed did not happen recently. It happened decades ago, shortly after the initial freezing. Sean was taken as an infant because the Institute needed an uncontaminated source of pre-war DNA for their Generation 3 synth program. He was raised in the Institute, educated by its scientists, and eventually rose to lead the organization. The sole survivor has lost not just months or years, but an entire lifetime. Their son grew old while they slept. This revelation forces impossible choices. Sean, now going by the title of father, offers the sole survivor a place in the Institute. He genuinely wants his surviving parent to understand and join the Institute's mission. But that mission includes the continuation of synth production, the replacement of surface dwellers with synth infiltrators when deemed necessary, and the Institute's absolute refusal to share its technology or resources with the surface world. The Institute's scientists view surface dwellers as little better than animals, too irradiated and too violent to be worth saving. They are focused on their own survival and advancement, not the Commonwealth's recovery. The sole survivor must now decide the Commonwealth's future. Each faction offers a different vision and demands different sacrifices. The Brotherhood of Steel wants to destroy the Institute completely, eliminating the synth threat, but also destroying centuries of accumulated knowledge and killing everyone inside, including scientists who might be innocent of the Institute's worst crimes. The Railroad wants to evacuate as many synths as possible from the Institute before destroying it, prioritizing the freedom of synthetic beings but potentially allowing dangerous technology to survive. The Minutemen offer a middle path, focused on destroying the Institute's ability to threaten the Commonwealth while avoiding the Brotherhood's zealotry or the Railroad's singular focus on synths. And the Institute itself offers the sole survivor the chance to reform it from within, to become the new director after Sean's death, and perhaps steer it toward a more benevolent relationship with the surface. The conflict comes to a head in a series of confrontations that will determine the Commonwealth's fate. If the sole survivor sides with the Brotherhood, they participate in a full-scale assault on the Institute, fighting through synth defenders to plant explosive charges in the reactor. If they side with the Railroad, they must infiltrate the Institute one final time, evacuate synths through an emergency tunnel, and then destroy the facility. If they rebuild the Minutemen, they lead a people's army against the Institute, proving that ordinary Commonwealth settlers can stand against the region's most powerful faction. And if they side with the Institute, they must defend it against the Brotherhood's assault and potentially destroy the Railroad and the Pridwin itself. Regardless of the choice made, the conclusion is explosive. The Institute's reactor detonates, creating a massive explosion visible across the Commonwealth. If the sole survivor destroyed it, the blast represents the end of the synth threat and the Commonwealth's most advanced scientific facility. If they defended it, the blast represents the destruction of those who would have stopped the Institute's vision for the future. Either way, the Commonwealth is forever changed. The balance of power shifts. The future becomes uncertain once again. In the aftermath, the sole survivor stands as one of the Commonwealth's most influential figures, whether as a Brotherhood paladin, a Railroad heavy, a Minutemen general, or the Institute's new director. They have shaped the region's destiny through impossible choices, each one carrying profound moral weight. And through it all, they remain a person out of time, the last voice from the world before the war, now forced to build something new from the ashes of everything they once knew. 15 years after the destruction of the Institute in the year 2296, the California Wasteland becomes the stage for a new chapter in the Fallout saga, one that will shake the very foundations of what survivors thought they knew about their world. Our story begins in Vault 33, one of the many underground shelters built by Vault Tech before the bombs fell. Here, more than 2 centuries after the Great War, life continues in the sterile, orderly fashion that the Vault's original designers intended. The residents of Vault 33 live in blissful ignorance of the harsh realities above ground, their days filled with community activities, educational programs, and the careful maintenance of their underground home. Lucy McLean is a product of this sheltered existence. Bright, optimistic, and deeply committed to the values her Vault has instilled in her, Lucy represents everything Vault Tech claimed their shelters would preserve: hope, civilization, and the American dream. But when raiders breach Vault 33's security and kidnap her father, Hank McLean, the Vault's overseer, Lucy's carefully constructed world begins to crack. Faced with a choice between the safety of her underground home and the love for her father, Lucy makes a decision that will change her life forever. She volunteers to venture into the Wasteland, a place she has only read about in pre-war books and seen in faded photographs, to bring her father home. The surface world that greets Lucy is nothing like the sanitized descriptions in her Vault's educational materials. The California Wasteland of 2296 is a harsh, unforgiving place where the strong prey on the weak and survival often means compromising the very values Lucy holds dear. The landscape is a haunting mixture of pre-war ruins and post-apocalyptic settlements, where the remnants of the old world serve as both shelter and graveyard. Yet despite more than 200 years of hardship, humanity persists. Communities have formed, trade routes have been established, and various factions vie for control of the Wasteland's limited resources. Lucy's journey quickly brings her into contact with 2 individuals who will fundamentally alter her understanding of the post-apocalyptic world. The first is Maximus, a squire in the Brotherhood of Steel. For those unfamiliar, squires are apprentice members of the Brotherhood, young recruits who have not yet earned the right to wear the faction's iconic power armor. They serve the full knights and paladins, learning the Brotherhood's ways while performing support duties and proving their worth. Maximus himself is a complex figure, someone who joined the Brotherhood seeking purpose and belonging after a traumatic childhood in the Wasteland, but who now finds himself questioning the organization's rigid hierarchy and often brutal methods. The Brotherhood of Steel that Maximus serves in 2296 has evolved considerably from its origins at Mariposa Military Base and later at Lost Hills. While the faction still clings to its core mission of preserving and controlling advanced technology, decades of conflict and isolation have taken their toll. The Brotherhood's presence in California is a shadow of what it once was, their numbers depleted by years of warfare with the new California Republic and other Wasteland factions. Yet, they remain a formidable force, their power armor and energy weapons making them some of the most dangerous combatants in the Wasteland. For Maximus, the Brotherhood represents both salvation and prison, a place that gave him purpose but demands absolute obedience in return. The third key figure in Lucy's journey is perhaps the most enigmatic: the Ghoul, a bounty hunter whose real name is Cooper Howard. To understand the Ghoul, you need to understand what ghouls are in the Fallout universe. When humans are exposed to massive amounts of radiation but somehow survive, they can undergo a transformation. Their skin becomes leathery and decayed, their bodies take on a corpse-like appearance, but they gain an extended, possibly indefinite lifespan. Most ghouls retain their humanity and mental faculties, at least initially, though the constant fear of going feral hangs over every ghoul like a death sentence. Feral ghouls lose their minds entirely, becoming mindless, aggressive creatures driven only by base instincts. The Ghoul is no ordinary ghoul, however. Beneath his ravaged exterior lies a secret that connects directly to the world before the bombs. Cooper Howard was a famous movie actor in pre-war America. a star who appeared in films and advertisements, including commercials for Vault-Tec itself. He lived through the Great War and has survived for more than 2 centuries in the Wasteland, transformed into the very monster that his pre-war cowboy characters would have fought against. The years have not been kind to Cooper Howard. Whatever idealism or heroism he once possessed has been burned away by centuries of survival in the Wasteland's cruelest corners. As the Ghoul, he is ruthless, cynical, and utterly pragmatic, a man who has seen the worst of humanity and become a reflection of it. Yet, glimpses of his former self occasionally surface, hints that somewhere beneath the monster, Cooper Howard still exists. The convergence of these 3 characters, Lucy, Maximus, and the Ghoul, occurs because they are all searching for the same thing, a mysterious artifact that has drawn the attention of multiple Wasteland factions. This object, whose exact nature becomes clear as the search progresses, is not just another piece of pre-war technology. It is a key, both literally and figuratively, to understanding the truth about Vault-Tec and the origins of the Great War itself. The hunt for this artifact takes our protagonists across the California wasteland, through ruined cities and makeshift settlements, into the depths of forgotten vaults and the lairs of wasteland predators. As Lucy pursues her father's kidnappers, she begins to uncover disturbing truths about Vault-Tec, the corporation that built her home and promised to save humanity from nuclear annihilation. The vaults, she learns, were never simply shelters. While some vaults like Vault 33 were designed as control vaults meant to house residents safely until the surface became habitable again, many others were something far more sinister. Vault-Tec used the apocalypse as an opportunity to conduct social experiments on a captive population, treating vault dwellers as laboratory subjects in studies that range from psychological manipulation to outright torture. These revelations force Lucy to confront uncomfortable questions about her own home. Was Vault 33 truly the paradise she believed it to be, or was it simply another experiment? What did her father, as overseer, know about Vault-Tec's true nature? The more Lucy learns, the more her faith in the institutions and values she was raised to trust begins to erode. This is the Wasteland's cruelest lesson, that the world before the bombs was not the utopia preserved in Vault-Tec's propaganda, but a place of corporate greed, government corruption, and casual cruelty on a scale that made nuclear annihilation almost inevitable. The search for the artifact also reveals connections between the various factions and organizations that have shaped the post-war world. The Brotherhood of Steel's obsession with technology, it turns out, is rooted in knowledge of just how dangerous pre-war science became in the hands of corporations like Vault-Tec, West-Tec, and others. The new California Republic's expansion and its conflicts with other factions can be traced back to competition over resources and territory that Vault-Tec's experiments helped create. Even the existence of super mutants, ghouls, and other mutated creatures ties back to pre-war research into radiation, biological weapons, and human enhancement. Through her encounters with Maximus, Lucy begins to understand the moral complexity of the Wasteland. The Brotherhood of Steel, which initially seems noble in its mission to preserve technology and prevent another apocalypse, reveals itself to be deeply flawed. Its members are capable of great heroism, but also of terrible cruelty, often valuing technology over human life. Maximus himself embodies this contradiction, a fundamentally decent person trapped in an organization that demands he suppress his compassion in favor of duty and obedience. His relationship with Lucy becomes a mirror for the larger question facing the Wasteland. Can people maintain their humanity in a world that constantly demands they abandon it? The Ghoul, meanwhile, serves as a living connection to the world before the bombs. Through his memories and experiences, Lucy gains access to the truth about pre-war America, a truth far removed from the sanitized version taught in Vault 33. Cooper Howard witnessed firsthand the corruption and moral decay that led to the Great War. He saw how corporations like Vault-Tec manipulated the public, how the government prioritized profit over people, and how the wealthy and powerful prepared to survive the apocalypse they were actively creating. His transformation from idealistic actor to ruthless bounty hunter mirrors the transformation of America itself, from a nation that claimed to value freedom and democracy to one that embraced authoritarianism and corporate control. The revelations about Vault-Tec go deeper than anyone expected. Evidence emerges suggesting that Vault-Tec did not simply prepare for nuclear war, they may have actively worked to ensure it happened. The corporation's leadership, it appears, believed that nuclear annihilation was inevitable and potentially desirable, a chance to wipe the slate clean and rebuild civilization according to their vision. Vault-Tec's experiments were not just scientific curiosity, but preparation for a post-apocalyptic world where the corporation would hold ultimate power, possessing the technology, resources, and knowledge to shape humanity's future. This conspiracy reaches back to the highest levels of pre-war society. Vault-Tec worked closely with other corporations, government officials, and military leaders who shared their vision of a controlled apocalypse. They developed the vaults not as humanitarian shelters, but as laboratories where they could test different social structures, genetic modifications, and psychological conditioning techniques. The goal was to determine the optimal conditions for rebuilding civilization after nuclear war, with Vault-Tec and its allies positioned to control that rebuilding process. The artifact that Lucy, Maximus, and the Ghoul have been pursuing turns out to be a key piece of evidence in this conspiracy. It contains data, records, and proof of Vault-Tec's involvement in triggering the Great War. The information it holds has the potential to reshape the Wasteland's understanding of history and to challenge the legitimacy of every faction and institution that traces its authority back to the pre-war world. For the Brotherhood of Steel, it raises questions about whether their mission to control technology is truly about preventing another apocalypse or about maintaining power. For the remnants of the Enclave and other government successors, it destroys any claim to legitimate authority. Even for communities like Vault 33, it reveals that their very existence is built on a foundation of lies and human suffering. Lucy's search for her father leads her to confront the most painful truth of all: Hank McClane's own connection to Vault-Tec's conspiracy. As overseer of Vault 33, her father knew far more about the Vault's true purpose than he ever revealed to his daughter or his fellow Vault dwellers. His kidnapping, it turns out, is not random violence but connected to the larger conspiracy surrounding Vault-Tec and the origins of the Great War. The revelation forces Lucy to choose between her love for her father and her commitment to the truth, between the comfortable lies of her Vault upbringing and the harsh realities of the Wasteland. The California Wasteland of 2296 stands at a crossroads. More than 2 centuries after the bombs fell, the survivors have rebuilt a form of civilization, but it remains fragile and fractured. The new California Republic, which once seemed poised to reunite the Wasteland under democratic rule, has suffered setbacks and challenges that have weakened its authority. The Brotherhood of Steel clings to its mission, but lacks the numbers and resources to enforce its will across the entire region. Smaller factions and independent communities struggle to survive in the spaces between these larger powers, each developing their own solutions to the Wasteland's challenges. Into this delicate balance comes the truth about Vault-Tec and the Great War, information that has the power to unite or further divide the Wasteland's inhabitants. Some will see it as proof that the old world's institutions cannot be trusted, that any attempt to rebuild pre-war civilization is doomed to repeat the same mistakes. Others will view it as a call to action, evidence that the Wasteland survivors must create something genuinely new rather than simply restoring what was lost. Still others will seek to suppress the information entirely, recognizing that such revelations could destabilize the fragile order that has emerged from the chaos. Lucy's journey from naive Vault dweller to Wasteland survivor mirrors the larger journey that all of humanity must make in the Fallout universe. She learns that the world is more complex than the simple moral lessons of her Vault education, that good people can do terrible things, and that survival sometimes requires compromising your principles. Yet, she also discovers that hope and compassion are not weaknesses but strengths, that the Wasteland's harshness has not completely extinguished humanity's capacity for kindness and cooperation. Her relationship with Maximus demonstrates that connection and trust are still possible even in the most hostile environments, while her encounters with the Ghoul reveal that even the most hardened survivors retain traces of their former humanity. The story of Lucy McClane and the events of 2296 represent both an ending and a beginning for the Fallout universe. They bring to light secrets that have been hidden since before the Great War, answering questions about Vault-Tec's true nature and the origins of the apocalypse that have lingered for more than 2 centuries. At the same time, they open new chapters in the Wasteland's ongoing story, raising fresh questions about how humanity should move forward with this knowledge. The revelation that Vault-Tec may have helped cause the very catastrophe they claim to protect against fundamentally changes the moral landscape of the post-apocalyptic world. As Lucy's story unfolds, it becomes clear that the Wasteland's future will not be determined by pre-war institutions or the factions that claim their authority. Instead, it will be shaped by individuals like Lucy, Maximus, and even the Ghoul, people who must navigate the complex moral terrain of the post-apocalyptic world and make choices about what kind of society they want to build. The Wasteland offers no easy answers, no simple solutions to the challenges facing humanity. But it also offers something that seemed lost in the nuclear fire: the opportunity to start again, to learn from the past mistakes, and to create something better than what came before. The events of 2296 and the California Wasteland remind us that the Fallout universe is not just about survival in a post-apocalyptic hellscape. It is about the resilience of the human spirit, the persistence of hope in the face of overwhelming darkness, and the eternal question of what it means to be human when civilization has collapsed. Lucy McClane's journey from Vault 33 into the Wasteland is the journey that all of humanity must make, leaving behind the comfortable lies of the past to face the uncomfortable truths of the present, and in doing so, perhaps finding a path toward a better future. And so, from the first atomic bombs falling on August 6, 1945, through the corporate machinations and technological hubris of the pre-war era across the 2 hours of nuclear annihilation on October 23, 2077, and into the long struggle for survival and meaning in the centuries that followed, the Fallout timeline chronicles humanity's greatest failure and its stubborn refusal to surrender to extinction. What began as a divergence in the 1940s, when transistor technology, never miniaturized, and atomic power became the solution to every problem, led inexorably to a world where the old nations destroyed themselves and left their descendants to crawl from the vaults and shelters to rebuild civilization from irradiated ruins. The Vault Dweller emerged in 2161 to save Vault 13 and defeat the Master's Unity, only to be exiled for changing too much. The Chosen One rose from a tribal village in 2241 to destroy the Enclave's genocidal dream of purging all mutated life from the planet. The Lone Wanderer activated Project Purity in 2277, bringing clean water to the capital Wasteland despite the Brotherhood of Steel's complicated motives and the Enclave's last desperate attempt at relevance. The Courier survived a bullet to the head in 2281 and decided the fate of New Vegas and the Mojave, choosing between the new California Republic's flawed democracy, Caesar's brutal legion, Mr. House's autocratic vision, or independent chaos. The sole survivor thawed from cryogenic sleep in 2287 to navigate the Commonwealth's web of synthetic life, institutional paranoia, and the question of what makes someone human, ultimately determining whether the Institute's science would save or damn the future. Meanwhile, in Appalachia, the Vault 76 residents emerged in 2102 into an automated wasteland where the scorched plague had killed every human survivor, forcing them to rely on the holotapes and terminals of the dead to understand what had happened and to eventually make contact with other factions, including the arrival of the Brotherhood of Steel and the Foundation and Crater settlers who would bring human civilization back to the region. And finally, in 2296, Lucy McLean left Vault 33 to find her father and discovered that Vault Tech itself had orchestrated the Great War, that her father, Hank, had destroyed Shady Sands to cover up his crimes and maintain the experiment, that the vaults were never meant to save humanity, but to test it in preparation for corporate colonization of the stars, and that Cooper Howard, the ghoul who had survived over 2 centuries, was still searching for his family while carrying the weight of knowing the truth about the company his wife had worked for and the apocalypse she had helped to plan. Throughout all these stories, certain themes repeat like echoes in a canyon. The question of whether humanity can transcend its violent nature or is doomed to repeat the same mistakes in every generation, the tension between collective survival and individual freedom, the price of progress when science advances without ethics, the corruption that festers in institutions that place ideology above human life, and the stubborn persistence of hope even in the most hopeless circumstances. The Brotherhood of Steel appears again and again, sometimes as saviors and sometimes as hoarders of technology who would rather see people suffer than risk dangerous knowledge spreading, their founder's vision twisted by successive leaders into dogma and paranoia. The Enclave, the shadow government that hid in bunkers and oil rigs while the world burned, repeatedly attempts to assert its claim as the rightful rulers of America, and repeatedly falls to wasteland survivors who refuse to accept that birthright and purity of blood matter more than courage and community. The new California Republic expands and contracts, reaching too far and spreading too thin, struggling with corruption and bureaucracy, but representing humanity's best attempt at rebuilding democratic civilization. Super mutants, created by the forced evolutionary virus as the master solution to human frailty, scatter across the wasteland in various forms, some intelligent and peaceful like Marcus and Fox, others mindless and violent, all of them reminders that the old world's attempts to improve humanity through science often created only tragedy. Ghouls endure for centuries, their bodies ravaged by radiation, but their minds often intact, living repositories of pre-war memory who bridge the gap between the world that was and the world that is, though many go feral and lose themselves to the rot. Synths, the Institute's artificial humans, raise questions about consciousness and slavery that the Commonwealth can barely begin to answer. Their existence a reminder that even after the apocalypse, humanity finds new categories of beings to oppress and new reasons to fear what it has created. Vaults continue to open across the years, each one revealing a new experiment, a new atrocity committed by Vault Tech in the name of research. Vaults filled with only men or only women, vaults that pumped in hallucinogens, vaults that pitted residents against each other, vaults that cloned a single individual, vaults that were designed to fail in specific ways so that the overseers could collect data on social collapse, all of it in service of a plan to eventually leave Earth behind and export human civilization to other worlds, carrying the same greed and cruelty to fresh planets. The Wasteland itself is a character in these stories, a harsh teacher that kills the weak and the foolish but occasionally rewards the brave and the clever, a place where pre-war ruins stand.